Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today we're diving into part 1 of What If Deku Became Bunny? A special shout out to the original creator, National Babe, for their incredible story Deku Bunny. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now let's get started with the fanfic. Buildings burned, car alarms rang, windows broke, water pumps exploded. Heroes ran this way and that, not seeing him rushing to save lives. An old water hero desperately used his quirk on a burning building that looked to be made of lava from the heat. Heroes specializing in strength and speed sped in and out like frenzied ants, depositing crying and wounded civilians on the ground near medics and nurses or anyone who could hold a bandage roll. He was above it all, standing on air, gazing at his handiwork. A smile tugged at the left side of his mouth, smoke rising from the corner. An old power, but he was still fond of it. Reminded him of the good old days, surrounded by those he loved dearly, now dearly departed. His haired enemy threw his blonde ashen head up, his own fiery red eyes locking with his emerald green. The man snarled, propelling himself forward with his quirk. As if that man could do anything. He outclassed this liar years ago and now? He was just short of a god, especially with all might gone. The one responsible for this destruction reached forward calmly, halting his enemy in midair. He stepped through the sky lazily, working his way to his old friend. The light from his glowing, solid green eyes illuminated his attractive span of freckles. He leaned forward, letting his eyes return to their natural state. He smiled at the captured hero who spat in his face. "I'll kill you for what you've done," the fake hero promised, voice low and rippling with anger. "I'll avenge those you've murdered." He kept smiling. "Will you?" He blinked slowly, lazily. "Will you, Kaken?" This couldn't be happening. Everything Izuku Midoriya believed in denied the sight before him. But then again, what did he believe anymore? Oh, peace, justice, heroism? Peace shouldn't look down on a broken boy and shatter his last clinging spark of childish dreams, which he had molded his life around. Heroism shouldn't bully a boy who admires him simply because he lacks a quirk. Justice shouldn't look the other way as this boy is burned and wounded. Hope shouldn't keep silent at the tear streaks on her son's face or his well-hidden damaged limbs. No, those things should not happen. But they did. And now, Izuku Midoriya stood at the outside of a crowd, clutching his mouth and ruined notebook, and watched as his friend struggled to breathe. Bakugo Katsuki had tormented Izuku for 10 years. His teachers looked the other way. All Might had delivered the final blow. His mother, loving and kind though she was and though he loved her dearly, didn't know how to help him. The world rose up in unison as the crowd murmured like Olympic watchers at the scene before them and shouted at him that he was incapable of being a hero. And in the face of all of that, Izuku ran. He ran as hard as he could, shoving past people and nearly losing his notebook. He ran for his life. He ran away. He stumbled through the streets, falling a few times and ripping his clothes, to a dark alleyway where his weak legs gave out. He nearly fell to his face, huddling beside a garbage dumpster and the brick wall. Sobs racked his feeble frame as he clutched his damaged notebook even closer. He was a coward. Did he not care for Kaken? Had he not always aspired to own even a fraction of the volatile teen's power? It wouldn't have mattered what his quirk was if he had been blessed with one. Kaken would have never turned on Izuku. Wishful thinking. The harsh reality of the world finally settled with all of its crushing weight on Izuku's exhausted shoulders. There was no love for him outside of his mother's embrace, and even she couldn't help him. Oh, how he wished he was in her arms at this moment, to wail his agony to her. To make clear all his troubles. To have her get angry as she rarely did and have her rise to protect him at all costs. Izuku's head shot upwards, wide-eyed. It so happened that he wasn't alone in that alleyway. A rather surprised teenaged boy, around 18 or 19 by the looks of his built frame, was sitting in the other end of the alleyway. He was well tanned, with messy brown hair highlighted by a few odd white tufts and deep eyes. Izuku couldn't tell in the darkness if they were brown or gray, but they captured his whole attention in a steadfast grip. He looked at home in the alleyway without seeming to be a bum, as if areas such as this were frequent for the strange teen. He looking dressed well enough in a jacket, nice, long jeans and expensive-looking, although slightly dirty, tennis shoes, clashed drastically with Izuku's messed hair, torn school uniform and tear-stained face. "Are you okay, little buddy? You kindly rushed in here without checking if you were alone or not." Izuku leapt to his feet, bowing deeply and repetitively as he had done with All Might only minutes before. "Oh me goodness, yes, I am so sorry. Sorry, Ilif." He turned to leave and embarrassingly tripped over his own feet. Whoa! The boy dashed forward, grabbing Izuku by the shoulders and lifting him to his feet once again. Clearly bro, you most certainly are not okay. Why don't we talk about it? Izuku cast a worried glance up at the teen, remembering how his mother would warn him not to talk with people he didn't know while he was out hero hunting. The guy noticed the look and laughed genuinely. Don't worry about it. I don't want to hurt you. I want to help you, which is why I'm offering to help talk you through whatever is upsetting you right now. Izuku shuffled, thinking of how his problems spanned so far back into his childhood. And it did hurt so much to think about it currently. It's rather complicated and long, and I don't think I can. His mouth, previously drawn into a line, started to quiver and wobble as tears threatened to begin again. The teen shrugged. All right, I can talk. From my experience talking with someone else and talking yourself, when you're ready, that is one of the greatest cures for any problem. The boy thrust his bottom jaw out, tilting his head up and thinking while he thrust his paint-covered hands into his jacket and leaned back against the wall. Now let's see. What's interesting about me? I'm almost 19, so I'm a legal adult, I have a convertible, I have a single dad, could have had a career in sports but I didn't want to. His slow voice trailed off as he got caught up in a train of thought. Why are you here in the alley? Izuku's voice was timid, he didn't want to pry, but he was deeply curious. It sounds like you gave such an easy life to enjoy out in the sun. Why be in here with the garbage? He had to restrain himself from adding like me at the end of his question. The teen raised an eyebrow. You really didn't look when you burst in here, huh? There was a hint of mirth to his tone as he stepped to the side and gestured to the walls. Gali abrovu. The walls were covered in paint. From gentle strokes with a brush, to strong areas from a can, there was barely a 3-centimeter gap to be seen on either wall. Animals, people, places. Izuku stepped around in circles, awestruck at the sight before him. Whoa! His voice was quiet still, but it overflowed with reverence for the painstakingly detailed murals. This is amazing. The teen grinned in pride as Izuku stepped over trash to view a bird closer up. Thank you. Areas like these are my pride and joys. Izuku jumped suddenly, remembering something important. Oh, I recognize this. I know who you are. The teen leaned backwards, looking concerned at Izuku's sudden interest. You do. Izuku tapped his forehead repeatedly. Yes, your art was on news one night, I put you down in my journal out of interest. Oh, right, my journal. Izuku was suddenly flipping through the damp pages, frantically searching for his entry on the graffitist. Aha! He shouted in triumph as the teen leaned forward to read. Unknown graffiti artist. Unknown quirk or usage of quirk. Rise to fame on social media through highly detailed art, each of which contains a depicted eagle. Has been dubbed Eagle, accordingly. Suspected use of quirk aid in painting of murals. Then as a side note I added, don't know who he is or his quirk, but I would love to find out. Izuku snapped the book shut and looked up at Eagle, eyes sparking with his old excitement. Eagle broke into a wide grin. He'd never had a talk with any of his fans before. Well, he'd come across a few, but he didn't want to announce that he was the guy they were talking about. So to have a young teen only a few years younger than he was, have such notes on him, and to get so excited over the prospect of meeting him that he was jumping up and down like a little bunny, made him blush a little out of embarrassment. Just a little though. Izuku shot out his hand. I'm so excited to meet you. Eagle gladly shook his young fan's hand, glowing with gratitude. I'm pleased to meet you as well. And dash, he let go, stepping to the entrance of the alleyway and looking around quickly. He stepped back in looking like a puppy who had just been adopted. Do you want to see my quirk in action? Izuku's heart soared. He shook his head vigorously, forgetting the legality of such an action as he whipped his notebook back open and swiftly started erasing his notes without tearing the pages. Eagle stepped through the alleyway picking a painting of his name Sake. He put his hands over it as Izuku held his breath. Slowly, gently, Eagle reached into the wall, through the painted areas, and cupped his hands around the bird. It blinked and folded its outstretched wings down by its side. Eagle slowly pulled his favorite animal out of the wall and set it gently on his arm. An outline of the bird remained where it had been on the wall, while the painted animal shook itself mightily. Eagle grinned down at his creation before nodding Izuku over. Come on. She won't bite. Izuku came over cautiously. Up close he realized that the bird was not only made of paint, but was fully three-dimensional as well. He followed Eagle's gentle lead and stroked the top of the painted bird's head, paint smudging his fingers. It closed its ink-black eyes and pushed up against his touch. She likes you. This is amazing. Izuku's fingers traveled to underneath her beak, scratching her chin and neck. Even Kaken couldn't hope for anything such as this. He realized his slip-up as soon as Eagle asked, "Kaken, who is that?" Slowly, Izuku told his new friend his tale, how everything in one seemed pitted against him, how he had been bullied and tormented, how he had just given up hope and ran away from his friend in need. Eagle listened through it all without a word, letting Izuku talk himself out. At the end, so exhausted was he that he almost fell over and passed out from the day's events and his long rant. Eagle kept him steadied with one strong, paint-covered hand. "All right, little bunny, it's late. I'm sure your mother is worried. I'll walk you home." Indeed, the sky was nearly black as they trudged through the city. At last, Eagle was gently guiding him up the stairs to his apartment. Then the teen had knocked on his door and was now talking with his mother. Wait. Izuku's eyes focused as he was handed into his mother's embrace. Had he gone through that whole walk like a walking stick? "And with respect, miss, I won't intrude. You two need to talk alone, so I'll leave you be." Inko smiled sweetly up at the teen, pulling him down and planting a kiss on his cheek. "Thank you, dear. I'm glad Izuku has a friend like you." The door was shut and Izuku was left to answer the many worried questions of his mother. Unable to lie to his mother with his unbearably tired mind, he told her everything as well. He denied being pulled from school. He would just enter the same situation elsewhere, and it was his last year of middle school anyway. Might as well finish. At last, he was herded to his bedroom with the reminder to change into pajamas before he fell asleep. He laid in bed, somehow still awake, and thought over his hectic day. He had no idea how his life would have changed from that point on. A month passed without much notice. Izuku was quiet and still in his classes, and for once so was Bakugo. A couple days after the sludge villain incident, he had cornered Izuku once in the hallway between classes, students and teachers passing by without a second look, and asked where Izuku had been during the attack. Izuku had thrown his hands up, shrinking in fear and pleading that he had been on his way home. When asked why he didn't stop by, for he always visited villain attacks, Izuku claimed to have been tired and talking with a new friend. Bakugo didn't believe any of this crap for 1 second. Friends? Izuku had only him. No one else dared to go near the useless, pathetically quirkless nerd. Tired? Izuku always stopped for villains and heroes, regardless if he had gotten 2 hours of sleep the previous night. Bakugo had leaned forward, reminding Izuku of his place by checking up on if the nerd had removed his application for UA or not. There would be pain if he hadn't. "I've pulled my application for the hero course, yes." Izuku meekly acknowledged, not looking Kaken in the eye. "Good." Bakugo smirked with pride. "Finally remembered your place, huh? I'm the only one from this school who will ever get into UA." Izuku bit his lip. I'm trying for their general education course." His voice was tiny, but he couldn't lie to Katsuki. The other boy was deathly quiet for a moment, causing Izuku to nearly fall to the floor from fear. "I'll be only studying the regular stuff like normal high school. I won't be challenging you, Kaken, I swear. And that's if I even get in." The look on Katsuki's eyes had terrified Izuku, causing him to screw his own tightly shut, waiting for the blow. But it had never come. He slowly peeked one eye open to see Bakugo walking down the hall with a calm facade around his being that warned everyone else to beware. It scared Izuku more than any abuse. As the rest of that month slowly passed, Izuku remained ignored by his classmates and teachers. For once, this treatment was bliss. It allowed Izuku to make new plans, think of his best friend, and most importantly, think of said best friend's quirk and hobby. Eagle's, or as Izuku discovered, Tadao's quirk was simply fascinating. Izuku had learned that Tadao could bring pencil drawing to life too, but they were less stable and more petulant than his meek painted creatures. Under the care and gentle guiding of Tadao, Izuku started training his body. It wasn't anything major, just enough to get him at least slightly into shape, but it had a profound effect. Even though it was just a month, his school uniform didn't hang quite as limply around his shoulders, and he didn't struggle quite as much with his heavy textbooks. But, due to his personal demon haunting his every step, no one paid attention to these developments. Until all attention was drawn to Izuku, that is. It was a normal day. Quiet enough with few disturbances in the classes and a general sense of peace in the lovely weather. School had just been dismissed, the throng of students coming to a surprised halt. Their school was rather small and not very well known, so the sight before them was shocking. "Oi!" Bakugo's angry voice rang out over the heads, all turning to face him as he pushed to the front. "What's going on here?" He stepped to the front, glaring down in mild surprise at the shiny convertible sports car before him. The driver turned and smiled placatingly. "Oh, nothing much. Just a dude waiting to pick up his friend." Tadao spoke casually as if to an equal or someone lesser than him. This manner, void of the usual levels of fear and respect, infuriated Bakugo. Judging by the fact that you seem to be alpha male here, am I correct to assume you're Bakugo Katsuki? Bakugo squinted, his blood pressure rising. What does it matter to you? His voice was eerily calm, the crowd of students backing away quickly. Tadao caught sight of who he was waiting for, pushed through the crowd and grinned back at Katsuki. Oh, just wanted to know who it was that Izuku had such a high opinion of. He revved the engine as Izuku quietly slipped past a shocked Katsuki and vaulted over the door into the passenger seat. But if that's not you, I totally understand. He revved the engine again, pulling away from the sidewalk, shouting over his shoulders as they left. Eat dirt. Katsuki was stock still. Izuku, weak useless need that he was, had actually gotten himself a friend. Said friend had enough money to buy such a sweet car as that, look Katsuki in the eye and mock him while driving away with someone who couldn't defend himself. And now the entire crowd was murmuring about Deku. Did you see that? Yeah, it was so weird. Did Midoriya have muscles? No, he couldn't have. Could he? When did he get so cool? Hello? Obvious question we should all be asking? Who was that hottie? Are they related? Man, that guy stood Bakugo up like he was nothing. Katsuki stiffened at this insult, turning slowly and finding the boy in the crowd. The boy grew pale, realizing his mistake, and the crowd hushed suddenly. Meanwhile, Izuku was throwing his arms up in the air while he and Tadao drove through a scenic route. He hooped at the wind tugging at his face and hair while Eagle laughed beside him. You know, Tadao shouted over the wind, made the news again last night. Izuku brought his arms down finally and looked over to his friend. Oh yeah? Anything good? Tadao smirked and pulled his phone of his pocket with one hand. He passed it over to Izuku. See for yourself. Izuku scrolled through the news article, reading aloud. New murals by Eagle, yada yada, more theories on your quirk, blah. Izuku suddenly cut off, sitting upright in his seat. With a new addition to his art, a leaping green bunny, many are now buzzing over the exciting prospect of Eagle having gotten himself a partner. Aptly nicknamed Bunny, this new duo are spreading their art across the city. Izuku turned, open-mouthed in sure ecstasy, at a laughing Tadao. He threw his own head backwards and laughed while covering his face with his hands. Congrats. We're now a permanent duo, Lil Bunny. They laughed and celebrated the whole ride. Tadao bought Izuku ice cream and lunch to mark the happy occasion. Sitting in the ice cream parlor, the rush of the discovery started to wane. You know, Izuku began around a mouthful of mint chocolate chip, it's almost funny how determined they are that you're using your quirk for our art. Tadao shrugged. Bleg. They're just trying to get a public example of what happens if you disregard the laws regarding quirks. He rolled his eyes, shoving his mouth full of ice cream. Determined, I tell you. Izuku nodded, well acquainted with Tadao's rants against the media and restrictive laws. I mean, I get why they have laws regarding quirk usage, with them being to protect those with weaker quirks and the quirkless. But banning them all together? Useless. Especially when jerks like that Bakugo disregard the laws entirely. Tadao stabbed his spoon into his ice cream, glaring angrily into it. Why don't they go down on him? Leave me well enough alone, I say. It must be nice. Izuku mused dazedly, changing the subject. Having a quirk. Bet it feels like you could do anything. Tadao smiled, placated. Yeah, it really is. They ate in silence a moment longer, guests leaving and entering, a man made of mist and wearing a smart bartender suit walking formally up to the counter. The low murmur was pleasant and calming to listen to, no one seeming to have noticed Eagle's outburst. Tadao spoke up again, hesitant. Hey Aizu? Izuku hummed and nodded for Tadao to continue. Say, through, like, science or genetics or whatever, and it was cheap enough, someone figured out a way to give quirks. Say all that was true. Would you ever try to get your own? Izuku was silent for a moment. Neither noticed the mist man turning his head slightly to listen better to their conversation. Honestly? Yeah. If that all were true, yeah. It's all I've ever wanted, isn't it? His smile faded and he slowly started stirring his ice cream. But that is just wishful thinking, isn't it? Later. School passed slowly while Izuku and Tadao obtained fame. Paint was almost always on Izuku's hands now, whether dried under his nails or splotches up his arms. Tadao picked him up from school every Friday, much to Bakugo's increasing frustration. Finally he was done with Izuku's attitude. That Friday, the last day of school before winter break, Katsuki pinned Izuku to the wall. Standing in the area between the art class and the kindergartners' classes, colorful animals and scenery adorned the walls. It contrasted darkly with the scene taking place as Bakugo looked down at the weaker boy trembling before him. Gakachem. Izuku, though he may fit properly into his school uniform, was still terrified of his old bully. Years of trauma can't be erased overnight, or a few months with a supportive friend. It seems you haven't noticed, Deku? He laid a hand on Izuku's shaking shoulder, smoke curling between his fingers. I don't like how you've been acting. And I'm here to fix that. Izuku whimpered but tried to keep a brave face. There's only a few months of school left, Kaken. Then you won't be able to do anything like this to me again. His eyes widened but he kept his mouth shut as Katsuki leaned forward. You got this attitude from your new friend, didn't you? Izuku's lip trembled. Don't talk about Tadao like that. Katsuki tightened his hand painfully around Izuku's shoulder. I'll talk about him however I want, nerd. I think you've forgotten who runs this place as well. Sparks went off around his wrist as steps echoed down the hall. You look up to me. And me alone, Deku. A spark landed on Izuku's face, making him whimper and try to pull away. Remember now? Izuku hastily nodded, tears filling his eyes. He didn't want to agree to his tyrant's wishes, but his need to leave intact was even stronger. Bakugo pulled Izuku's shoulder back and slammed it back into the wall as the steps grew louder and more hurried. Say it. Izuku opened his mouth obediently, ready to spill false praise as he used to always do. Salvation wasn't far away, however. It came in the form of a colorful blur knocking into Katsuki and a familiar paint-covered hand grabbing Izuku. The arms of his savior pushed Izuku behind his back, standing between Katsuki and a painted badger. Tadao glared as Bakugo yelped in surprise, smashing his palm onto the creature and setting off an explosion. Paint flew everywhere, covering Katsuki and Tadao, colors splattering on the walls. Eagle winced, feeling the creature's death, but stood tall as he protected his shaking friend. The two teens stared each other down, violence and tension ripe in the air. Both looked close to murdering the other. Tadao was the first to break. He whipped around, keeping one arm secure about Izuku's shoulders, and marched briskly to the exit. Izuku sent one last wide-eyed glance to his former friend, and Katsuki saw the absolute fear in his emerald eyes. That evening, Tadao, Izuku, and his mother had a conference about what to do with the current situation. It was decided that Izuku would take special tests over the break in order to try and graduate early. If he failed, he would be pulled from school and finish his middle school education at home online. Inko Midoriya, furious at the treatment and oppression her son had gone through, called both the school board and Mitsuki, telling of Katsuki's actions and all that Izuku had been through. Tadao was called into the police department for his unlawful use of his quirk, but since it was in defense of someone else and he didn't follow up on any attack, he was left with only a fee and a few days of confinement to his home. Katsuki, on the other hand, was deeply punished. Forced to do social work, suspended from school for 2 weeks on top of his break, grounded by his mother until he started at UA, and nearly losing his application to the hero school. But, at last, that chapter of drama had finished. Izuku's old classmates never saw him again, and rumors concerning him circulated the building until a teacher quenched the fire, or until Katsuki returned to debunk myths himself. The volatile teen never spoke to anyone, remaining silent and stoic. Meanwhile, Izuku could be found, riding along with Tadao in the streets, spray-painting back alleys, having family dinners with Tadao, his father, and Inko. He laughed, grew, stayed up late, played board games. He was a lively teenager, nursing a dark side and hatred. He couldn't find it in himself to argue anymore with Tadao about the unfairly balanced weights of the lawful system. Instead, he more often than not found himself agreeing. His dark side took a turn for the worst one day at the mall. If he had known what would develop from that day, he would have been shocked. As he looked back, he wouldn't have changed a thing. It had started as a lovely day. Tadao and Izuku were simply having fun shopping in the mall. Already they had picked up several new paint cans, couple jeans, headphones, and gotten Izuku what he had dubbed the best jacket of all time. It was dark green, had lots of big pockets, and a good with 2 big floppy bunny ears. Izuku excitedly ripped off the tags as they walked out of the store and adjusted the jacket to sit more comfortably on his shoulders. He grinned up at Tadao eagerly, the older teen smiling back. They walked along, visiting other shops for more goods. As Izuku was busy perusing a shelf of leather-covered journals, a commotion outside drew in him and Eagle. An older man, late 30s to mid-40s, was running, stolen goods clasped to his chest. He was tripped and ganged up on by security police, 3 piling on top of him in a matter of seconds. He struggled and pleaded, begging for mercy. He had a wife who was ill, they were on the brink of losing their home. They'd already lost their car, he just needs a little. Izuku gagged at the horrid scene before him, repulsed that they wouldn't listen to what the man was saying. A hero, dressed in gaudy red with her long blonde curls falling down to her waist, pulled the men off of the thief, and Izuku had momentary hope she would listen to him. But no. She pulled him up into the air via materializing ropes, taking all the glory for herself and continuing to mock the man while crowds cheered her on. Izuku wanted to go and tear her apart right then and there, but what could he do? He may be fit, but he had never actually fought anyone before. Tadao seemed to have a similar train of thought, but unlike Izuku, he wouldn't be stopped. He reached around the corner, placing his hand on a full-sized lion that the store used for a logo. It exploded out of the wall with a tremendous roar, rushing the crowd alongside its master. Izuku barely had time to register a hurried, "I'm sorry Izuku," before his best friend was gone. Tadao reached up his arm, pulling a small flock of tiny birds out of his own skin and sent them flying into the hero's eyes. She yelped and screeched, batting her face while the lion knocked the police to the ground like bowling pins. Eagle whipped a pocket knife out and hastily freed the thief. Bending down, he snatched the stolen money from the floor and jumped onto his own personal lion steed, dragging the man on top to sit behind. He spurred the lion forward and was gone. It had taken only a few seconds, but it was enough. Izuku was left rooted to the spot, his bags falling out of his lifeless hands. The crowd murmured, and a few stepped up to help the distressed hero and floored cops. But Izuku couldn't move. He'd lost Tadao, his one true friend. The guy who had helped him so much in such a short period of time. His only friend. Izuku fell to the floor next to his bags, the worried voice of the store owner sounding distant and muted. Shocked tears started leaking from his eyes, soaking into the wonderful jacket Tadao had bought him. He sucked in painful breath after painful breath. The store owner started calling for a doctor, shouting that he had a kid going into shock, but Izuku couldn't hear. He'd lost Tadao. Izuku was passed from person to person, finally landing in the view of a professional doctor who pestered him with questions he couldn't hear. The doctor asked about his friend. Not the guy who had rushed out to aid a villain, not the guy who had betrayed Izuku, but his friend. His friend who had done what Izuku wanted to do. His friend who had run out by himself to remove the chance that Izuku would get caught. His friend who hadn't abandoned him, but gave him a whole new chance to make a difference in this unfair world. Izuku's eyes cleared of their fog, and for a moment, his face was crystal clear and gentle. Then he acted his part, screwed up his face and sobbed. A nearby mother rushed over and tried to comfort him. An officer opened his phone and called Izuku's mother. News reporters flocked to the mall like ants to spilled honey on a hot day. Cameras were shoved in his face and he openly bawled on live TV at the loss of his kind friend who was like an older brother to him. The news lady remarked on how Izuku had just gotten free of a horribly toxic childhood bully, only to now lose another friend. His mother arrived and ferried him home worriedly. She prepared his dinner but he barely touched it, acing his role as inconsolable teen. Tadao's grief-stricken father rushed over to the Midoriya household to be mothered and comforted by Inko while Izuku lay despondent on his bed. As quickly as it had entered his life, all the good Tadao brought had been ripped away. No more ice cream parties and late-night games. No more convertible rides in the sun or shopping sprees. No longer could he text Tadao, asking questions about his quirk or family. His life promised to revert back to being cold and friendless. His mood cleared after a few days, and by that time the paint had washed off of his hands, and the news made the connection that Tadao was Eagle himself. Izuku begged his mother to let him outside again. "Mom, if I find him, I'm sure I can convince him to come back." Finally, under her son's insistent pleas and the conclusion that fresh air would do Izuku good, she relented. Izuku sped through the city, searching their hotspots for his beloved friend. He scanned on websites dedicated to their work for sightings of Eagle, and easily triangulated the most possible area of where Tadao could be hiding. He searched high and low, covering the area in 20 minutes. There was no sign of his friend. He almost gave up hope, but a soft and familiar hissing sound drew his attention to the alleyway on the other side of the street. He crossed hurriedly, barreling through the alleyway and straight into the arms of Tadao. Tadao stumbled back in surprise, his paint-covered hands reflexively wrapping around Izuku. "I knew I'd find you. I knew it." Tadao huffed in genuine mirth and rubbed his hand through Izuku's hair. "Of course you would. If anyone could, it'd be my little bunny." His smile at Izuku's glowing pride soon faded. "Izu, look, I'm so sorry but I can't go back. I know that's why you came to find me but I can't. I've never felt so free." Izuku cut him off, laughing. "Bring you back? Don't be ridiculous. I've never been prouder to have you as my friend." Tadao's mouth opened in surprise at the genuine answer. "You are?" Izuku needed more brightly than he ever had before. "Of course. You did exactly what I wanted to do. You sacrificed yourself to make sure I wouldn't get caught. He toned down the brightness of his grin, smiling happily at his friend with the same level of genuine pride. You were a hero to me and no doubt to that man as well. Izuku bowed his head as tears welled in his eyes, and tightened his embrace. I'm proud to stand by you, Tadao. Tadao, shaking himself from trying to hold back tears, hugged Izuku even more firmly. Thank you, lil bro. Izuku, quietly, discreetly, decided to follow Tadao on the path of villainy. It was never anything big, a bank heist here, jewelry store there. Small-time gangs clamored for Tadao's influence and quirk, often surprised that he wouldn't work without his faithful bunny. Izuku, they would always find, was invaluable in this line of work. Yes, Tadao was the one out doing the work with the big boys, but Izuku was the one to pull apart security systems with a well-trained eye, to determine which heroes would come and how to best exploit their weaknesses. He often scared his employers by picking apart their quirks, weaknesses and strengths as if he was talking about the weather. They would shuffle and murmur, and Izuku would explain for the 100th time, no one's getting their hands on these journals, I guard them like they're solid gold. In fact, I could probably get their weight in gold and more if I visited the right people. Yeah, Tadao was much better suited to deal with people than Izuku was. This was the usual pattern of events whenever a group or lone wolf approached them in hopes of hiring the duo, and it was no different when the Man of Mist approached them in the same wish. Well, not until the end, that is. Eagle and Bunny soon discovered the petulant nature that exists as Tamura Shigaraki. They weren't overly thrilled with the discovery, but the League promised too much for them to turn away at the first small sign of discomfort. Tamura outlined, with several instances of Kurogiri filling in gaps, what he wanted Tadao to pull to see if he wanted to recruit the teen. The simple heist job was simple enough, but Tamura was keeping an important aspect out of the equation. What about Bunny? Tadao jerked his head towards his smaller friend. Tamura's eyebrows lifted and he cast a disinterested look to Izuku. What about him? He's quirkless, isn't he? Izuku huffed, but Tadao answered back first. So what? Yeah, he's quirkless. He's also the reason we have an unbroken streak of success. I may be able to help push through whatever you want me to do, but Izu here can pull apart any plan, security system, or person, and learn everything there is to know concerning the matter in seconds. Tadao shrugged. Even if that weren't true, he and I come packaged together. You get me, you make room for my Izuku. Sighing, Tamura gestured towards Izuku and Tadao. Your word is great and all, but I need proof of that. Eagle nudged his faithful companion. Go on, show off that big brain of yours. Izuku shuffled, uncomfortable. You know it freaks people out. Yeah, well, they're freaks. I don't quite see the harm in it. Swallowing at the convincing counterpoint, Izuku scanned the room, allowing his big brain to click into overdrive. His eyes landed on the bar itself, the bartender Kurogiri, that strange monitor that he felt was somehow listening in, petulant Tamura, and a strong bodyguard standing behind Shigaraki. He opened his mouth, ideas tumbling forth. Well, it's best I start with these quirks. Kurogiri's, I imagine, though seeming to be able to transport plenty of people at once, no doubt has limitations. Most likely he cannot open a portal to somewhere he hasn't been, or doesn't know very well. For instance, you couldn't portal into All Might's bedroom, or else you would have already. Probably would be best to become familiar with as much of Japan as is possible for you before you make your big move and get all the attention. Izuku's paint-stained finger moved, landing on Tamura's bodyguard. Run-of-the-mill strength amping quirk, dime a dozen variety. No doubt he is at his max level right now, and judging on how he has acted, I assume he cannot willingly turn it off. Simply enough, do bodybuilding exercises to increase your limit. Otherwise, nothing special. And me? Tamura was genuinely interested now, appreciating the truth of Eagle's words concerning Bunny, whose finger was now pointed at his chest. You seemingly hold no voluntary control of your quirk, evidenced by you holding everything with one finger lifted. Easy way to work around that would be gloves, the type with 2 fingers cut off, preferably the ring and pinky fingers. This would allow full grip on any object and would allow you to easily disintegrate them for combat by simply tapping your ring and pinky finger to your palm. As for physical attributes, I would say, considering that you would be a close combat fighter, you need to exercise your body to its full potential. Clearly, however, it seems you already have started this. Regardless, there is always room for improvement. Izuku's finger drifted to circle around the room while his employers whispered and Tadao beamed in pride. As for your hideout, it seems silly to have just the one. I would set up 3 others spaced widely apart across Japan. If this one is ever found or destroyed, you would need somewhere to fall back on. This is where Kurogiri becoming well acquainted with Japan would help. Regardless of distance, you could be in and out of danger in mere moments. Alright. I get it. Tamura waved his hands, signaling for Izuku to stop. You're on the team to see if I want you on MY team. You two run off now or whatever. Your group is leaving in an hour, so make sure you're ready. And don't fall behind. You're working with the big boys now. As the two left, escorted by his bodyguard, Tamura turned to Kurojairi. What all he said, could it work? The bartender thought silently for a moment before answering. Yes, I do believe it would. Tamura turned back, pulling a handheld gaming console from his pocket. With Aizu and Tadao stretched, working out a small cramp in his shoulder while Izuku busily switched between typing into his laptop and scribbling in his notebooks repeatedly. He was in his full bunny costume, consisting of his jacket, tight black jeans, combat fingerless gloves, and a pair of hiking boots. To hide his identity, he wore a pair of mirrored goggles, the type that consisted of one lens, and covered the top half of his face with green. Tadao was never sure if it was green paint or some form of green dust, but it effectively hid Izuku's prominent freckles, so he wasn't going to complain. The younger teen almost always carried his laptop and notes with him in a bag slung across his shoulders, and kept a collapsible baton on his person should anyone ever find his rabbit holes where he hides to direct missions. Tadao didn't bother with any fancy pants stuff to hide his identity. The media already knew who he was, so it didn't matter to him. What did matter to him, however, was making sure Izuku was fully protected. Despite his undying faith in Izuku and his confidence in the boy's prowess with a baton, Tadao could never bring himself to leave Izuku alone. He let Izuku tag along whenever their mission wouldn't put either in much danger, or left a creature, or painted as they were now called, with his loyal friend. Izuku now had a myriad of bunny paw prints across his pants and jacket, and one on his laptop, but he didn't mind. Izuku let out a low growl as the van he, Tadao, and the gang members Tamura had sent, ran over a bump, causing Izuku's pencil to slide along his paper. He angrily snapped his notes shut, jamming them into his bag with a huff, and returned to his laptop. His notes could wait. He needed to memorize the bank's floor plan. Tadao smiled as he watched his best friend scroll on the small laptop, murmuring softly. Several of the gang members cast questioning looks to Izuku, then to Tadao. He does this a lot. You'll get used to it eventually, Tadao answered. Distractedly, Izuku gave a muttered before he returned to his work. Believe me, that isn't nearly the weirdest thing he does. Finally, the van pulled to a stop, the crew jumping out into the night. Tadao, being the last to disembark, winked at Izuku, giving a thumbs up. Izuku slipped his headset on, tapping the side, and directed a confident smile at his friend. I'll be with you every step of the way. And he was, from remotely deactivating electronic locks, to the security systems, to the hidden panels in the vault. No one was one step out of his line. He smiled as he traced Tadao's footprints back towards the entrance. Soon the lot of them were piling back in the van, dragging the stolen loot with them. Tadao, entering first, tossed a small red object at Izuku, who caught it with deft ease. They were giving fresh apples for 5 yen. Tadao explained, biting into his own fruit as Izuku examined the shining wax on his. Enjoy your first stolen food item. Izuku laughed and carved a large hole out of the fruit. Chewing it, he wiped his chin of the running juice as the van lurched and began the drive back to the bar. Back at the bar, Tamura was clapping slowly, amusedly. Congrats. It seems you two really weren't exaggerating. You're now both official members. Shigaraki stopped clapping, pointing his long finger directly at Izuku. And you, Izuku, isn't it? The teen in question swallowed rather nervously. Yes. My master wants to meet you. We've worked out what you might call a gift. This time, Izuku's swallow was definitely nervous. Tadao put his arm around Bunny's shoulder protectively, not liking how slowly Shigaraki was dragging out his words. What kind of gift, and who is your master? Tamura was just about to reply that this was none of Tadao's business, but Kurojairi cut him off. A gift concerning Izuku's quirkless state. This was my idea, including hiring you two, for I heard you two one day in an ice cream parlor. Kurojairi calmly warped himself to the other side of the bar counter, standing in front of Izuku. You, Tadao, asked Izuku here if he would ever attempt to gain a quirk, should the possibility become available through science. And you, Izuku, said that you would, even though you believed it to be a fancied dream. Here, the bartender knelt on one knee before Izuku, appearing far less intimidating than what seemed possible. He rested one misty hand on Izuku's free shoulder. Our gift is that impossible dream. You can have not just one but multiple quirks if you desire. As for our master, that would be me. The voice emanated from the small TV screen, casting a strange feeling of calm over Izuku. I was long ago blessed with the quirk of taking others' quirks, and imparting those quirks to whom I choose, or to keep them for myself. Despite the calm that had taken Izuku over, his eyes widened at the tale being told before him. I wish to give you what you deserve, what you have been mercilessly tormented over lacking. There was a pause as All for One let these words sink in. With an unspoken cue, Kurogyari opened a portal to his master's personal chamber. Will you accept? Izuku stared at the mist before he slowly dragged his eyes to Tadao. He searched the face of his dearest friend, as if looking for permission to get what he had always wanted. Tadao stared back wide-eyed. Blinking, the older teen gave 1-minute nod. Robotically, Izuku turned and stepped through the portal. The television screen in the bar shut off, its persistent, yet soft, static coming to a rare cease. In AFO's private room, Izuku stepped forward, pulling off his hood and goggles. He stepped towards the dark figure in a daze, almost disbelieving he could finally get what he wanted so badly. All for One smiled as if a teacher seeing his model student. He reached his large hand out and laid gently on Izuku's shoulder. He tenderly prompted Izuku forward to stand directly in front of his large form. Before he could speak, asking permission into the boy's mind, Izuku whispered first. Can you really do it? Can you really give me a quirk? The master's smile persisted. I plan to give you more than one, child. All I need is access into your mind, to find what would be perfect for you. Through his daze, a small frown tugged at Izuku's lips. Why give me multiple? It's been proven multiple times that many have trouble learning just the one, and I have no experience whatsoever. Wouldn't it make more sense to just give me one, and throw me on the front lines with Tadao? All for One chuckled. The boy's intelligence and wit continued still to amuse him. Normally, yes. This time, however, I am planning on not only supplying you with quirks perfect for you, but also to give Tamura a second in command. He needs one he can trust, who can match him in intellect. Someone with more power to carry out what he cannot, but someone with a meek obedience such as yours who will follow him. Someone with a wit that you have perfected to challenge him, help him grow. One who, should it ever happen, could replace him if he ever fell in battle. That is why I have decided to give you multiple. I have chosen you, young Midoriya, to stand by my pupil's side, to be his right-hand man, counselor, and friend. Izuku was open-mouthed at the level he was to be placed at. Having been at the bottom of society all his life, such a high status seemed far too important for him. I'm not sure I can fill such a role. Kurogyari and I will guide you, little bunny. Now, will you allow me into your mind? Izuku nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Reaching up with his other hand, All for One slid his hand around the side of the boy's face. Izuku closed his eyes and nuzzled into the touch as the ancient man activated a mind-reading quirk. He starved of fatherly affection. Now I have two like this to deal with. At the thought of his father, Izuku's few memories of Hisashi Midoriya came floating to All for One's mind. A young Izuku gasping excitedly as he unwrapped an all-might book from his father. Hisashi lighting Izuku's candles on his 4th birthday cake with his quirk. Izuku, slightly older, bouncing on the couch, asking his mother where his dad was. At the answer that he was out working, Izuku whined, wanting to know when he would return. Inko simply shrugged and said she didn't know when, but that he still loved his little All Might. Izuku in his early teen years, getting only a card for his 13th birthday. The apology inside growing splotchy with Izuku's tears. Izuku walking through school on Father's Day, depressed and with dark thoughts of self-harm. Self-harm wasn't necessary in his mind for long, as Katsuki came to remind Izuku of his broken family. All for One sensed Izuku's distress at these thoughts and moved to the next subject. Izuku's mother. At this command, memories flooded across the telepathic link. From Inko holding Izuku as he cried over not having a quirk, to her pampering him with gifts to hide that his father sent none. His young self trying to take notes as she demonstrated her quirk. Inko and he laughing at the television, her making him chicken katsudon. Seeing her blushing and smiling face as she welcomed Tadao and his father into her home, feeling prideful at seeing Tadao's father blush in return. His sad memories at his mother's distressed neutrality over his plights, but never a hint of negativity towards the woman who had raised him. All for One. A wonderful woman, your mother? Izuku nodded, smiling and rubbing against the large hand caressing his face as he did so. I love her more than anything. He stilled, a thought coming into his head which All for One read before Izuku voiced it. Is that bad? I'm the bad guy now, right? All for One realized that his thumb was stroking Izuku's cheek, as if he was the child's father. It is not wrong to love, my boy. Far from it. Only be careful with your love or else one will harm you with it. Forgetting the two-way nature of his link, All for One thought back to his early days, when he gave his brother the stockpile quirk. Instantly, Izuku's conscience flitted to his own betrayed loves. All Might and Katsuki overwhelmed All for One's thoughts of his traitorous brother, and he felt his hand grow wet from Izuku's sudden tears. I've learned my lesson in that area. All for One shushed the boy, his other hand moving to caress his face. He pulled out of Izuku's mind, taking note of the memories of All Might's weakened form. So he knows about All Might. He's been betrayed by both he looked up to. It's no wonder he has developed such a strong bond with Tadao. Despite his comfortings, Izuku continued to cry, the sting of All Might's words still too fresh. He lied. He said anyone could become a hero, but he lied. Yes, All Might is weak, pathetic. He holds to his stolen power as a leech and looks down on those he used to be like. Izuku grit his teeth, pulling his tears to a stop. I hate him. His voice was guttural, startling. Izuku had never heard such a sound come from his own mouth before. All for One only chuckled, however, pleased with Izuku's anger. You aren't alone, my boy. You aren't alone anymore. And soon you will no longer be powerless. Izuku turned shining eyes back to his new master. You found my quirks? Indeed, hey. Two, similar to your mother's and father's, will be the first you inherit. Once you've grown accustomed to them, I will consider imparting more to your store. The one like your mother's I have named Attractive Force. It will allow you to push or pull an object towards or away from yourself. Number of items you can pull or push I have made to be limitless, and the range is far greater than that of your mother's. The other I have copied straight from your memories of your father. Fire Breath, much hotter and bigger than your father's, only with minimal chance of damage to yourself. With these and much training, you will be far stronger than any hero student at UA, and almost every hero in the world. He stopped for a moment, letting Izuku mull every aspect of the quirks offered to him. Will you take these gifts, my child? All for One gently asked. Izuku nodded, a lamb in the hands of his shepherd. He smiled at the sight of All for One grinning in pleasure, the scars on his face wrinkling upwards. The ancient master slid one hand over Izuku's face slowly. Close your eyes. This is as painless as falling asleep. At that moment, as the quirks were passed into his body, the gentle shock caused him to black out. His world faded and he grew powerful. A few minutes later, the small television screen popped back to life. Kurogyri. All for One briskly asked, waiting for the meek response. Open a portal and supply these two with a room to stay in. Young Midoriya needs sleep and guidance as his quirks manifest. Send a text to his mother that he will be staying the night at a friend's house. Kurogyri bowed. Of course, sir. Tamura, All for One continued, addressing his wayward pupil. Shigaraki sat up eagerly as Kurogyri led Tadao, who was carrying a sleeping Izuku, to his new living quarters. Yes, master? You remember my plans for the boy? Tamura stuck his tongue into his cheek, displeased. I don't see why I need him, but yes, I remember. I need you to be open to him. Let him help you grow. It's the only way you'll ever accomplish your dreams, Tamura. Calmed, Shigaraki bowed his head, accepting the admonition. I'll try. You will. With the final command, the screen shut off once more, allowing both master and pupil silence to think of the day's events. Ho! Try to keep it down. You'll attract the cops. Yeah. You need to calm down. Tadao. You're not even listening to me. Tadao, look at me. Yes, Izuku. Tadao snapped up at his friend. Yes. I can see you. You can basically fly and you breathe fire, I know. You've been doing that for the past hour. Elated, Izuku jumped high into the sky again, pushing himself off of the earth with his newfound power. He spun in midair, doing a loop and breathing a jet of white-hot flames. He laughed and fell back to the earth, catching himself with his quirk sloppily and collapsed on the ground in a heap of laughter. Tadao rubbed his face at all of the noise, turning his head towards Kurogyri in distress. Does he have to be so loud? Can't you help me keep him quiet? The bartender, rather amused at the scene before him, shrugged. I can't control him, he's your best friend, not mine. And besides, he waved a misty hand as Izuku warmed his cold hands with his fire before he jumped back into the early morning sky. Try to remember that he went from one of the weakest people on the planet, to one of the strongest in half an hour. Let him have his fun a while longer. Tadao nodded and went back to watching Izuku perform messy loops and twirls. He pulled empty boxes towards himself with attractive force and blasted them with a burst of fire, before allowing gravity to resume its hold on his body. He laughed the whole time. He again caught himself only a few meters from the ground and landed on his feet with a thump. Izuku giggled, regaining his balance and stopping his foot on the ground like an actual bunny. It is nice to see him so happy. I'm glad we took your offer. Tadao muttered as Izuku ran over. Giri nodded and watched with an invisible smile as Izuku enveloped Eagle in a bone-crushing hug. You have to return to your home now, young bunny, before your mother starts to worry. The bartender explained as Izuku cast his eyes to him. And remember, when you are not with us or alone in your costume, you are still quirkless. Do not, under any circumstance, forget this. Izuku's shining face grew serious and he nodded, detaching himself from Tadao. Soon after changing in an alleyway back to old, plain Izuku, he was gone, catching a bus back to his house and to his loving mother. Tadao and Kurogiri watched him leave. If we're going to be attacking UA, he's going to need a lot of practice. Eagle cast a worried look to the man of mist. He's got nearly 11 years of training to catch up on, and that's training for 2 different quirks. Kurogiri nodded. He and I will have 2 scheduled training days every week until his school career at UA starts. I've decided on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've also left him with a personal training plan for him to work through on his own. Should he stick to this, he'll have mastered his body and quirks in no time. Tadao nodded, satisfied with the answer. The two started walking along to the same alleyway Izuku had changed in, making small conversation. If Master does give Aizu another quirk, what I think it'll be? Kurogiri thought for a moment. Master's plan for young Midoriya is to have him excel in multiple areas, for in his lifetime of experience, well-rounded soldiers are the most capable. Add to that great power, intelligence and patience, and Izuku one day might just be unstoppable. He already has his mobility and weapon, in the form of his 2 gifted quirks, so I would imagine that a form of a restoration or defense quirk would be the next to come. The bartender opened a portal back into their bar and the 2 stepped through quickly. They landed in the training room, dimly lit and littered with staves. I will consult Master on the subject. Practice in here for a while. I need to prepare lunch. Tadao nodded and bent down to grab one of the staves. When he had risen, the bartender had gone. Months of training and work, late nights out, jobs, fame, sweat and tears, all culminated into Izuku standing at the front of the doors to UA High School, the top hero academy in the world. Was he nervous? Yes. Was he fully ready? Not really. He hadn't been exposed to any form of public schooling for over 6 months, having graduated early at the beginning of winter break of his last year. He knew he could always leave again and he would always have Tadao and his mother to run to, but he was still afraid that this would result in yet another living hell for him. He lowered his head, grit his teeth and stepped forward. You're not weak anymore. You will have to make sure that this won't be a repeat of middle school. He walked forward and tripped on his own feet again. He closed his eyes, waiting for the crash. Surprisingly, it never came. He blinked one eye open, shocked to see the ground not rushing towards his face. Did I activate force by accident? He panicked, trying to regain his feet hastily. Sorry about that. Yelping at the cheerful voice behind him, Izuku tried to whirl about to see the newcomer. Whatever was keeping him suspended, however, did not act like force did and he moved too quickly, setting himself in an infinite barrel roll. A hand came out to steady him and gently oriented Izuku back onto his feet. Oops. Sorry again. The newcomer was a short girl with brown hair and pink cheeks. Cute, despite her slightly plain appearance, she made Izuku's face flush. He didn't often talk with girls that weren't his own mother. I saw you were going to trip, so I tried to help and used my quirk on you. She explained, touching the pads on her fingers together and allowing Izuku's full weight to return to the Earth's control once again. Izuku straightened immediately. Oh, haha, yeah. It's no problem. Thanks a lot. She smiled, sticking her hand out with her pinky tucked in against her palm. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Izuku discreetly wiped his hand inside his pocket before reaching out to shake hers. I'm Izuku Midoriya. After shaking, both withdrew their hands back into their pockets to protect them from the cold. Neither saw a scowling Bakugo pass murderously behind them. Anyways, Ochako continued, smiling brightly, are you excited? I bet hero stuff is going to be so cool to learn. Izuku felt his hopes sink just a little. So, she made it into the hero course, huh? Haha, yeah, I bet it would. She turned and waved as she began to walk away. Well, hope I see you in class. You probably won't, Uraraka. She halted, with a surprised look on her face as Izuku slowly walked beside her again with his chin tucked between his shoulders from embarrassment. Why? You are enrolled here in UA, yeah? She asked, the two walking together towards their separate classes. Izuku blushed. Yes, I am. but I'm in the general education, not heroics. She liked confusedly over to his as they crossed the threshold. Did you fail the entrance exam? And no. I never took the heroics exam. Why, sick. You look like you could have made it through. What's your quirk? Here we go. Izuku thought despondently, here we go again. I chose not to take it cause I've lost my will to be a hero, and because I'm quirkless. He screwed his eyes shut, waiting for her response. She's going to hate me or be disgusted or pity me just like every dash. Whoa, you are. Her voice was soft and he slowly nodded. And you got into UA? I didn't cheat or anything, I sweet dash. That's awesome. Izuku whipped his head to her as she shouted in excitement. His eyes widened to the size of dinner plates when he saw her beaming face. It is. His voice was strained. He'd never gotten such a response when telling that he was part of the shunned 20% of society that lacked his superpower. Even if he didn't anymore. Yeah. Uraraka pumped her fist up and down from excitement. You must be like really super strong or smart or something. I mean, clearly you are strong, I can see that, but wow. She was interrupted from any further loud exclamations by another teen rushing up to them. Blue-haired with glasses, this boy used many erratic arm movements as he spoke to them. You two. Please keep the noise down. I understand that we are all excited, but this is no time to disrespect other people's privacy. Now it was Uraraka's turn to blush out of embarrassment. Sorry, whoever you are. I got a little excited talking with my new friend here, Izuku. Please call me Ida. And if I may, what were you two talking about that would call for such a reaction? The boy Ida promptly asked. It seemed from his behavior and quick informal speech, that he was one well accustomed to rules and tight schedules. I was excited as Izuku here, who had melted into an embarrassed puddle on the floor though neither had yet noticed, got into the Gen Ed course and he's quirkless. Just really surprised me. That and it's super cool. Ida nodded once, briskly. Yes, that is quite the achievement. Even more so when you consider that no one else has made it in without a quirk. Say, what are you doing on the floor? Izuku, holding his face to hide that it was a solid beet red in color, was lying on the floor all curled up. Thank you and I'm sorry, it's just I've never had this reaction when I tell people I'm quirkless. They usually shun me or something of the like. I'm not used to feeling like being quirkless isn't a disability. I'm sorry if me on the floor is making you two look bad. It's just really touching that someone thinks so high of me when you hardly know me. He said all this in a mumbled rush, too overcome by how touched he was to rise from his position or remove his hands from his face. His voice rose to a very high-pitched squeak as he finished his rushed ramble. Uraraka and Ida rushed to comfort a still mumbling Izuku, walking with him to his classroom in 1C. Finally he had calmed down, and they left him to go to their own class to start the day. Izuku breathed deeply once, clearing his face of the last of its red flush, and opened the door to his classroom. Inside were his new classmates, most talking amicably with each other, reading their textbooks or library books, or, in the case of one kid who sat in the back trying to catch up on a few minutes of sleep. It was next to him that Izuku decided to sit. With his fluffy purple hair and apparent need for sleep, he seemed to be a rather unthreatening desk neighbor. Just as Izuku sat his bag on the floor, however, the boy spoke up. There's a free spot over there. Without lifting his head, the kid pointed a finger to the only other free seat in the room, aside from one on his other side. Huh. Izuku started, beginning to lift his backpack back up. Do you not want me to sit next to you? The kid slowly turned his head to look at Izuku, revealing tired purple eyes. You won't want to sit next to me sooner or later. Might as well save yourself the trouble early. He explained in the same bored deadpan. Izuku hesitated. The boy hadn't directly said that he didn't want Izuku to sit next to him, only that he believed something would scare Izuku out of sitting next to him. Swallowing and pulling his mouth into a line, Izuku took his chances and sat down next to his purple neighbor. The boy blinked as Izuku turned and gave him a small smile. Hi. The boy shrugged, sitting up as their teacher entered the classroom. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. Izuku nodded and sat quietly through his classes. He and the boy continued to sit next to each other, with only one other of their classmates seeming willing to sit next to the boy. He had Izuku on his left, and a calm but cheerful girl with long curls which were predominantly white with a myriad of red, green and blue streaks and highlights on his right. She had pretty blue eyes and smiled happily at Izuku when she had first sat down. Classes passed and soon, the three found themselves sitting down at a table for lunch, trays of steaming food before them. The quality was much better than what Izuku was accustomed to at his old school, and he was quickly digging through his while the boy and girl talked amiably. This is nice. The girl stated after swallowing a mouthful of food. Making new friends on the first day. The purple-haired teen, who Izuku and the girl had followed to lunch and who was a rather unwilling participant, picked at his plate. No one mentioned we were friends. We don't even know each other's names. The girl nodded. Ah yes, of course. I totally forgot. I'm Miya Yanagita. Izuku quickly piped in with his own name, and both he and Miya looked expectantly towards the final member. The teen sighed. Hitoshi Shinso. I'm stuck with these two optimists, aren't I? Shinso thought tiredly as the two others beamed in delight. They chatted loudly, or, well, Miya and Aiza did. Shinso stayed quiet, mostly listening to their conversation, and was slowly getting roped into it. The ambient noise grew as another class filed its way into the hall, bickering and laughing. Soon they were sitting down, and Izuku suddenly got a mind-numbing feeling of dread and fear. He swallowed, cutting his narrative short. Are, either of you suddenly feeling, like, extremely nervous? He started balling his napkin up in his hand, glancing around for the source. No. Shinso said uncertainly. Ah, okay. Just me then, huh? No biggie. Izuku chuckled nervously again, fidgeting and unable to eat from the feeling of being a very weak mouse looking up at a very strong cat. Miya, to Izuku's right, looked concerned, glancing around as well for anyone who might be causing her new friends discomfort. Could someone be using their quirk on you? Izuku groaned, bringing his hand up to his mouth. I hope not. Oh, why is it always me? Mia's eyes widened, and she pointed across the hall from where she was standing. That guy diagonally to your left. He's glaring right at you. Izuku's head snapped to his left, and sure enough, there was Katsuki. He had found the perfect spot where no one was sitting between the two of them. Bakugo was glaring right at Izuku, slowly chewing on a piece of his own lunch. He sat alone, several students walking past him with hurried steps. Izuku wanted to cry. He turned his face away and hid it with his hands, but he could feel Bakugo's stare boring a hole into his head. He started trembling. He hadn't seen his tormentor in months, and he was sure that the volatile teen was determined for his blood. I'm guessing you two know each other? Shinso asked, looking above people's heads to look at the ashy blonde. Izuku chuckled again, desperately trying to calm his nerves. It was a futile effort. Haha, yep. Good old Kaken. He dashed. Izuku couldn't take it anymore. He darted under the table. He just needed to get Bakugo to stop looking at him. Anything to get him to stop. Izuku pulled his knees up to his chest and buried his face there, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. You said you wouldn't let him do this to you anymore? You said you wouldn't let his do this to you anymore? You're letting him win by being so weak. Tears leaked out of his eyes, soaking into his sleeves. Miya quickly sat down, reaching under the table. Hey Izuku, what the mat eep? Izuku's hand darted out, clasping onto hers while he continued to rock himself and murmur. She rubbed her thumb against the back of his hand, trying to soothe the distressed boy. Hey, it's okay. Whoever he is, we won't let him get to you anymore. We're friends, right? Izuku's muttering quieted slightly, and Shinso could be heard shuffling and moving. Izuku revealed one large, terrified green eye, shocking poor Miya. He's horrible. His voice was shaking and another tear leaked from his eye. Hey. Shinso nudged Izuku with his boot, leaning down to look at his friend. Come back up, I fixed it. Izuku didn't rise, turning to cast a confused look to Shinso. Come on. Don't you trust a guy you've only known for 3 hours, and who has said barely anything to you? I'm serious, get back up here. Slowly, with a gentle hand from Miya, he finally pulled himself from under the table. When he cautiously looked up to see what Shinso had done, Izuku's mouth fell open. His friend had moved to the left, blocking Katsuki's glare with his own thin shoulders. Do I need to move over any? Or have I got him? Izuku swallowed, overcome by kindness for the second time that day. No, you've covered him. Thank you. Shinso shrugged, trying to fight away a small smile. No big deal. He's a bully of yours, isn't he? At Izuku's nod, he continued. I just know what it's like. Because of my quirk, people never feel like they can trust me. Izuku's shoulders slumped as he realized that Shinso had gone through close to the same treatment he had. I'm sorry, Shinso. We both got trouble for our quirks, huh? The purple-haired teen nodded, Miya listening without comment to their exchange. What's yours? Oh I'm actually quirkless. Casey dash, Izuku closed his eyes and shook his head no. Bakugo always attacked me because he felt I was lesser than him. Hold up there. Miya suddenly interjected, Shinso mirroring her worried expression. What do you mean he attacked you? Izuku bit his lip, shrinking in fear. Well I dash. How far did he bully you, Midoriya? Bowing his head, Izuku slowly rolled up his sleeves, revealing his many hand-shaped burn marks. These 10 years of living through hell and the day of that sludge villain attack, he said I could take a swan dive and pray for a quirk in my next life. His voice was quiet as he told them his troubles, and he could barely be heard over the other diners. Eat quickly, Shinso ordered. We're going to see a teacher. I agree. Mia piped in, looking furiously over at Bakugo. Izuku waved his hands about quickly. No. That isn't necessary. Izuku, he told you to kill yourself. Mia argued right back. The teachers need to know about him. They already do though. He hastily explained. He got caught right before winter break and got into huge trouble over it. He nearly lost his application here. All the teachers already know about him and me. He smiled sheepishly. We can still talk to a teacher if you want, but right now. Izuku swallowed and looked right at Shinso. Move back over please. I need to show Bakugo that he has no control over me anymore. Waiting a second, Shinso slid back into his original seat. Bakugo, who had never let his gaze wander, now increased the intensity of his glare. He stared right at useless Deku, an anger akin to bloodlust emanating from him in waves. Therefore, the sight of Izuku laughing with his two new friends threw him off guard. Izuku smiled and laughed, holding his face as he now did while he giggled. His eyes sparkled, and once he even had the audacity to look Katsuki in the eye and smile cheerfully back at him. Bakugo's food grew cold while Izuku ate his with relish. Soon the laughing trio had vanished through the hallway doors, leaving Bakugo behind. He'd never felt more infuriated. Not when that loser hadn't come to his villain attack, not when his stupid villain friend came to mock him, not when said villain attacked him, saving the useless Deku's life. No. Seeing the defiant attitude that had grown in Izuku enraged Bakugo more than anything else ever had. He'd have to teach that nerd a lesson. He would always be better than useless Deku. Izuku wasn't actually sick. He'd been pretending the last few days when, totally coincidentally the same day 1A was scheduled for their USJ training. He was simply feeling too horrible to come to school, as his mother had put it. Thus he had been subject to a morning of pampering when the only thing he was sick with was nerves. Finally, he had ducked into his room, claiming that he was going to try to sleep a little more. Of course, sweetie. Don't worry, I won't bother you. She beamed at him, placing a cup of cold milk in his hands. He smiled back at her. It felt all he did anymore was smile. He was almost starting to get tired of it. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. After a hasty gulp of his drink, he placed the glass down on his desk, now void of all hero merch, and sent a hurried text to Kurojiri to pick him up. He ducked through the materialized portal, landing in the old bar. All right. We got him. Tamura exclaimed with impatience. Hurry up and get changed. We want to get there before they get started. Izuku nodded, yanking his iconic jacket over his head and dipping into the adjacent room to change into his full costume. You sure placing the kids where you said will work? Tamura shouted through the walls. Yep. Izuku tightened down his hiking boots before rising to apply his green dust across his horribly recognizable freckles. I got the deets on all of 1A's quirks. This placement should keep those we teleport busy for long enough. What about that Bakugo kid? Tadao asked as Izuku re-emerged, pulling his reflective goggles over his hood. Wouldn't he just blast through those guys like putty? Izuku smirked, genuinely happy. Oh, I plan on having a chat with Mr. Number 1. Among other agendas. Alright, enough with the chit-chat. We need to go. Tamura ordered, impatient for bloodshed. Izuku held up a hand as Giri began to open a portal. Hold up, bad news? Ugh, what now? Choosing to send Tamura a dirty glare for his impatience, Izuku explained. I watched the morning news with Mom. All Might was busy today, meaning he's used up probably quite a bit of his quirk time. He'll probably be late. Tamura had been quite pleased all those months ago to learn of what Izuku knew and had been told by Master about Tashinori Yagi. However, that knowledge wasn't bringing up any happy feelings at the moment. Infuriated, Tamura began to scratch at his neck, a habit that disgusted his three companions. Okay, of course he has. He always wants to ruin my plans, doesn't he? His scratching stopped as soon as it had begun. No matter. Killing some kids doesn't sound all that bad to me either. Maybe it'll draw him in. And with that creepy conclusion, the attack began. Izuku had no doubt that seeing the terrified faces and sensing the fear of the students helped to soothe his insane commander's temper. Izuku rolled his eyes at the dramatic flair Tamura insisted on weaving into his entrance. Their horde of low-time villains spilled out onto the plaza, Mr. Aizawa rushing down to fight them all. Bunny turned to Kurojiri before he warped up to the opening steps. Take me to the ruined zone early if you will. I have bait to organize. Giri obliged without much of a second thought, and Izuku left with a final stay safe to Tadao. He landed on the concrete floor heavily, and instantly began ordering the low lives about. He dipped into a side room with a window peering into it, stood behind the glass to ensure that he could be seen, relaxed against the wall and began playing with the dust in the air with his quirk while he waited for his prey to appear. He didn't have to wait long. Katsuki and Kirishima engaged in battle almost immediately, creaming through the low lives exactly as Tadao had predicted. Izuku started whistling quietly as they fought, still playing with the dust. Once the immediate dangers were unconscious, the two heroes in training began talking. Izuku smiled cynically as Bakugo picked their plan apart. He figured he would always admire his Kaken's inherent genius talent, even if they were now to become bitter enemies. "I'm always calm and rational, you idiot." Well, whenever that genius was to be seen, that is. His anger would always be utterly despicable. "Ah, that's more like it," Kirishima responded before they both suddenly went quiet, Izuku's whistling echoing through the halls. Bakugo stormed the short distance to the wall and knocked his fist back, hand already glowing with a powerful explosion. "Get Oii there, you coward." The explosion shook the whole building, Kirishima coughing and waving dust away from his face. Once the dust cleared, however, they were shocked to find the debris the wall had been blown into, hanging by nothing in mid-air. Bunny could be seen through the cracks, grinning from ear to ear. "Boo!" He threw the debris right back at Katsuki, blowing the volatile teen into the opposing wall. Kirishima shouted in surprise, activating his own protective quirk, but Izuku paid no attention to him. He breathed a white-hot fireball into his palm, tossing it up and catching it as he stepped through the hole in the wall. "What? Did you think they would have left you here without one of the big boys to come play with you?" He clenched his fist, the fireball dissolving into a cloud of sparks. Katsuki was back on his feet now, edging towards Bunny's right. Izuku led him, more than confident in his new abilities. Due to his quick mastery of force and breath, his master had gifted Izuku with two new quirks. A regenerative quirk for him to use on himself and others, and a quirk that heightened his senses. Aptly nicknamed Regan and Spidey Senses, after one of his favorite comic book characters, he now was far more powerful and trained than any of the students and many teachers of UA. Katsuki was now fully on Izuku's right, sandwiching the young villain between himself and Kirishima. "Play with Ha. Think you can stand in the same ring as me?" Izuku lazily rolled his head to stare at Katsuki, enjoying playing with the two. "Oh, I know I can." Bakugo rushed him, Kirishima doing the same. Izuku simply ducked, allowing Katsuki's explosion to blast his ally in the face, while Kirishima's hardened fist slammed into Bakugo's chest. The two stumbled back, both gasping as Izuku calmly straightened and rubbed one of his costume ears between his finger and thumb. "I quite clearly can." Izuku allowed Kirishima to hurriedly walk by and face the two head-on. "Are you ever actually going to fight us?" Katsuki demanded, breathing heavily as he regained his feet. "Do you even know how to coward?" Izuku's cynical grin returned, smoke and sparks trailing from his mouth. "I am more than able to fight. I just want to make sure you understand your place first." He hissed out the word place, spitting Katsuki's own words back at him. He lowered into a fighting stance. "So, shall we begin?" Back at the plaza, Tadao turned his head from where he stood beside Shigaraki and glanced towards the sounds of explosions and yelling. Izuku's familiar voice could be heard, his manic giggles and yells resounding throughout the building. He could barely recognize Katsuki's shouts, which were even louder than Bunny's. Tadao turned back, mouth drawn into a half-frown. "I still don't like Izuku by himself." Shigaraki sighed annoyedly, Nomu standing silently beside him. "For the last time, he's got 4 quirks, Unini. Bunny is more than capable to deal with high schoolers. Now get out there and fight already. This guy is creaming through the others." Tadao's frown grew, but he obeyed. He leaned over, touching his back where he hid a painting of a lioness face. She exploded from his back, landing on all fours and pacing to his side. He ran forward, her by his side, and entered combat with the pro. He ducked his face, remembering Izuku's warning about Aizawa's quirk, that his quirk could only be erased if Eraserhead stared at him for more than 3 seconds. If he could just block his body with his painted, then Aizawa should have no control over his quirk. He and Izuku had trained side by side slightly, and while he now paled in comparison to his younger friend, he was still particularly adept in combat. Back with Izuku. As Tadao jumped into combat, Izuku was forcefully thrown out of it. Bakugo released a huge explosion right into Izuku's face, the first real hit either he or Kirishima had been able to land on Izuku despite the many burns Izuku had left on them, Bakugo in particular. Izuku was seemingly disinterested in fighting Kirishima. Bunny was still struggling to get back up, smoke curling from his mouth as Bakugo grabbed him by the jacket. His smoking hands left marks on the soft forest green cloth. Katsuki pulled Izuku up to his face, sneering at his captured rabbit. "Let's see what fire breath will do for you now." He pulled his arm back and launched Izuku through the wall with an added explosion for extra force. Izuku tumbled through the air, catching himself with force deftly. He was hanging over the flood zone, having to repeatedly renew his push as the water kept displacing, allowing him to start to sink. He was therefore bouncing up and down slightly as he slid on nothing and stood once again. Izuku spread his arms wide, grinning maniacally. "Breathing fire isn't all I can do, Katsuki. I am no one-trick pony unlike yourself." He remained in the air, allowing himself time to catch his breath while Bakugo howled at the insult. He leaned out of the window. "How are you doing that? Get back here, you coward." Izuku was about to yell back for Katsuki to face him himself, but Kirishima stepped in, pointing out Izuku's bouncing self. "That doesn't matter. Look, Bakugo. It's like he can't keep himself suspended over water very well." Bunny scowled, reaching with both hands and quirk. "Let's see how well you do over water." He pulled the two forward, launching Kirishima into the air and pushing Bakugo down into the water. "Have at him, boys." Izuku yelled, catching Kirishima as he began to fall. He walked in the air as he pulled the redhead towards himself. Kirishima struggled against his invisible bonds, yelling, "What are you doing? They're going to kill him." Izuku hand-waved the concern. "Oh no. Katsuki is far too strong for the low lives, even if he's dealing with water. Look, there he is." At Izuku's word, Bakugo surfaced, setting off an explosion and small tidal wave. "You, however, have a strange loyalty to Bakugo. You've only known each other for a few days, so what could he have possibly done to deserve this?" Izuku tapped his chin as he thought, frowning slightly. Definitely no sign of kindness. Perhaps his determination or skill in combat. What does it matter?" Izuku waved as if shooing away a fly. "You'll see he doesn't deserve your loyalty." "What are you talking about?" The two bounced upwards as Katsuki set off another wave beneath them. "Why do you hate him so much?" Izuku squinted, though Kiri couldn't see. "You really don't know anything about him, do you? Well, look into him a little bit, specifically about his middle and pre-middle school records. You'll see why I loathe him." He allowed Kirishima to start to sink in mid-air, returning use of limb. "See you around." Izuku turned and leaped towards the plaza as Kirishima fell, landing perfectly a few steps away from Tamura. He strolled casually up to his commander's side, a little bounce in his step. "Finished with your fun?" Izuku smiled. "Yes. Katsuki is in deep waters and I have placed a seed of doubt in his follower's mind. I'll work to cultivate it when I cross him at school." "Well, isn't that just peachy for you?" Shigaraki's voice was stretched thin with anger. Before Izuku could ask what was wrong, his leader elaborated. "While you were busy, I've lost nearly all of my men to this guy, sent Eagle in early, attacked him myself, and a kid has escaped to warn the teachers." Izuku swallowed as he saw Tadao on the battlefield, struggling to keep up with the elite pro. He nodded. "As expected." "This isn't good," Tamura shouted, scratching at his neck. Izuku snapped right back. "I didn't say it was good. I said it was expected. All Might and the others will soon show and then it's game over for one of us. Just have patience." Tamura growled at the command. "I'm done with patience. You go get on the field." Izuku grit his teeth, but now was not the time for arguments. He still had yet to gain his leader's trust as master wanted, and so Bunny stepped forward, ears flapping around his face. Tadao was struggling and he finally slipped up. Aizawa activated his quirk on Tadao, melting the painted lioness and erasing the teen's quirk. Eagle gasped, feeling the death of one of his beloved painteds. Without the help of his creature or quirk, Aizawa was soon on top of the teen, wrapping his restrictive bindings around Tadao and throwing him into another lowlife. "No!" Izuku lurched forward, causing Eraserhead to whip about in alarm, meaning to use his own quirk on whatever was threatening him. Due to Izuku's reflective goggles, however, Aizawa and he couldn't make full eye contact. Izuku threw the pro into the air, launching a burst of flames after him as he raced to Tadao's side. Bunny rubbed his hand through Eagle's brown and white hair, his hand glowing slightly from his healing quirk. "Tadao?" he asked, his voice as small as a child's. Eagle groaned and Izuku let out a sigh of relief, childish fears melting away. He pulled his older friend to his feet, helping him back to Shigaraki's side. He stepped back to the fallen pro who Izuku had caught before he crashed and broke his spine or something of the like and observed him. Knocked fully out. Izuku stepped over him and returned to his commander's side. "Aren't you going to heal the others?" Tamura asked, his voice for once void of its usual malice. Izuku shrugged, setting Tadao down on the floor. "I honestly see no point. Less than half of them are even slightly loyal to us, we hold no connections with them, and kindness would be viewed as a tool to help themselves in this situation, not strengthen their trust in us. However, I am still your subordinate. Shall I help them?" Tamura thought for a moment. "Nah. Don't care scrap about these guys." "Neither do I." Izuku agreed, glaring at a couple students who were beginning to edge towards their fallen teacher. "Shall we let them take Eraserhead?" "No. Nomo. Take the hero and scare those kids," Shigaraki ordered, pointing at Ochako and Mina. The girls scampered back immediately, avoiding the lifeless doll but not fleeing as Nomu grabbed Aizawa by the foot and dragged him back to the waterside. Izuku tapped his foot, on edge as Shigaraki spotted 2 more kids by the water. All Might should have arrived by now. Pros are supposed to be fast, aren't they? Well, All Might isn't here. Might as well have some fun. I've still yet to kill some kids. Izuku turned as Shigaraki dashed to the waterside, mad with bloodlust. He recognized the 2, Tsuyu and Mineta. Shame for the frog. Izuku honestly didn't bear much in the way of ill will for most of the students, but she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He turned away, disinterested in seeing the sweet girl's demise. His eyes landed on her teacher and he smirked. The man was awake now, staring Shigaraki down, who was busy looking at his hands in confusion. "Aizawa. Very clever." Izuku stepped towards the hero, nearing the wounded pro. Before he or Shigaraki could act, however, the doors exploded. All Might had finally arrived, signaling peace and safety for the bedraggled UA students. They gasped and sighed with relief, the low lives looking on in fear. For many, if not all of them, this was their first time being face to face with the top pro. They were clearly intimidated. Even Tadao was wide-eyed. For Bunny, Shigaraki, and Kurogiri, however, the magnificence of All Might's entrance lacked any inspiring qualities. The pro dashed forward, striking a blow before any of the villains could react. All Might zipped through the low lives, knocking many of them unconscious. He scooped Aizawa, who had passed out again, into his arms and grabbed the 2 children out of the water. Along the way he landed a blow on each of the 2 in charge of this attack. Izuku's eyes widened as All Might's fist collided into his stomach, his sight going dark before he could see the blow landed on Tamura. He coughed, gasping for breath. He heard Eagle calling out a worried Bunny, but couldn't speak to acknowledge the concern. Tadao's strong arms helped Izuku to his knees, whereupon the younger boy violently threw up what remained of his breakfast. Moving his glowing hand to his abdomen, Izuku activated his healing quirk, allowing Tadao to pull him to his feet. He swayed slightly but stood his ground, looking in pure loathing at the top hero, ordering Mineta and Tsuyu to carry their severely burned teacher to the doors. He hated that man, sitting on his throne of lies. Anyone can be a hero, he claims, you just have to have a competent quirk, otherwise you're out, kiddo. There was that false smile, comforting the 2 brats and making Izuku want to gag once again. The perfectly scripted inspirational one-liners to prove how heroic he is. Yet what about his weakness? No. He was, from his pointy hair to his stylish shoes, a hypocrite through and through. It made Izuku want to leap out and attack All Might where he stood, and only Tadao's tight hand on his shoulder stopped him. After ensuring that the kids were dragging Aizawa away, All Might jumped forward and aimed a punch at Tamura. He was blocked by Nomu, the hulking monstrosity protecting its master. The 2 exchanged furious blows, Izuku and his comrades watching intently. Tadao's focus was torn, however. He was busy replenishing his stock of painteds, spray painting the ground with one hand, using a brush to create less than detailed small animals on his body with the other. Soon, All Might went for what could have been a finishing blow, bending backwards to smash Nomu's head into the concrete. An astoundingly quick move by Kurogiri was what saved the artificial human, the bartender proving his worth. Tamura was delighted. Nice. You were trying to bury him in the concrete so he couldn't move around anymore. Sorry, that won't work. Nomu's as strong as you are. That won't stop him. Tamura giggled as the hero grunted in pain, Nomu's claws sinking into his side. Izuku chuckled along, holding a hand to his mouth as Tadao worked busily behind him. Nice work, Kurogiri. Tamura praised. We've got him just where we want him now. All Might released Nomu's legs to pull at the beast's claws, working without success to free himself as Kurogiri slowly tightened the warp gate. Izuku watched on in morbid fascination, his blood pumping to see the spectacle before himself. If this is your best, then you picked the wrong place to attack. All Might accused, glaring Tamura down. You should just give up now, says the man immobilized and bleeding. You are such a hypocrite, Izuku thought disdainfully, watching All Might suffer in Nomu's grip. Tamura didn't respond to the threat, scratching at his neck absent-mindedly. Kurogyri. Normally I wouldn't want blood and viscera flooding the inside of my warp gate, but I'll make an exception for a hero as great as you. The bartender tightened the portal, the hero slowly being sucked into the middle. Izuku held his breath, and even Tadao halted his hurried work to watch. Since you're too fast to see with the human eye, Nomu had to restrain you. And once he's pulled your body halfway through, I'll squeeze the gate shut. Kurogyri explained his plan, a strange amusement Izuku had never heard before filling his voice. I'm going to enjoy tearing you to pieces. Izuku was impressed. It was a great plan and would have ended the fight then and there, should no new interference come. But of course what can go wrong will go wrong, and interference came in the form of 3 very unwanted students. Bunny's blood began to boil as the all-too-familiar ashen head came into his sightline, even more so when he saw how quickly the volatile teen detained of their means of escape. A sheet of ice coated the floor, trapping Izuku and Tadao, who had been in the process of standing and coating Nomu's side. Izuku turned, seeing Endeavor's youngest calmly strolling across the plaza like he owned the place. Izuku breathed into his hand, melting the ice encasing his and Tadao's legs while Kirishima attempted an attack on Tamura. While they were thus distracted, All Might pulled himself free standing near Shoto. Bakugo started ranting, detailing how easy it was to figure out Kurogyri's weakness, and inadvertently displayed his own great faults, his bloodlust and ego. As soon as Tadao had been freed, he went to work on bringing his painteds to life. Soon he had another lion, though much smaller, a badger, 2 eagles, and a flock of tiny birds pulled from his arm. The action drew Shoto's attention, who reacted by sending a wave of ice to the unsuspecting criminal. Blocking the attack, Izuku leapt in front of his friend, a jet of fire shooting forth. He caused the ice to evaporate on the spot, pushing with force to send Shoto rocketing backwards. All Might grabbed his student, jumping forward and landing them out of harm's way near the other 2 students. Izuku glared after them. Through this all, Shigaraki hadn't moved. He was calculating the situation, his intelligent brain working in overdrive as he spoke to buy more time, Izuku and Tadao walking calmly to his side. They escaped uninjured and captured 2 of my strongest men. Kids these days really are amazing. They make the League of Villains look like amateurs. Can't have that. Izuku nodded. I had hoped the low lives in the water would slow that one down. He pointed to Katsuki, hatred clear in his voice. I am rather disappointed in them, but I suppose it was to be expected. Bakugo grinned maniacally, leaning towards Bunny. You thought those weaklings could stop me? No. Izuku continued, never looking away from his old bully as Shigaraki commanded Nomu. The hulking beast rose, destroying its own limbs in favor of regenerating them to move freely. No, you'll need a big boy to take you down. I had only hoped they would delay you so you couldn't cause trouble. What is this? I thought you said his power was shock absorption. All Might accused, standing and clasping a hand to his bleeding side as Nomu stood before them once again. I didn't say that was his only quirk. He also has super regeneration. Nomu's been modified to take you on, even at 100% of your power. He's basically a highly efficient punching bag that hits back. And should that fail, little Bunny will be more than happy to finish the job. Izuku grinned, smoke curling from his mouth at the thought. First though, we need to free our method of escape. Get him, Nomu. The beast rushed to Kurogyri, All Might moving in a blur to protect Bakugo. The boy was tossed away as the 2 forces collided. The dust and wind blew against the onlookers, Izuku blocking the worst with force. So, you protected the child, huh? Shigaraki mused as Izuku turned to watch his peers. All Might was infuriated, glaring with a fiery intensity at the villains before him. These are kids and you didn't hold back? I didn't have much of a choice, he was threatening my companion. Besides, these kids are no angels. Bunny sent a quick glance at his commander, sensing another tirade coming, but quickly turned his glare back onto the teens. Tamura and All Might held a brief confrontation, in which the hero came out on top by picking apart who Shigaraki truly was, a chaos-loving lunatic. The students moved to attack, but All Might ordered them to stay back to stay safe. You would have been in trouble earlier if it weren't for me, remember? You need our help. Shoto stated, staring coolly at Izuku, who was ready to attack when the command inevitably came. I thank you for your assistance, but this is different. Just sit back and watch a pro at work. All Might turned, dismissing his students, and faced the instrument designed to kill him. Nomu. Kurogiri. Kill him. Bunny Eagle. Deal with the children. As the two indestructible forces collided once more, Izuku and Tadao rushed towards the group of students. Bunny tried his best with force to block the fierce winds, but the strength was nearly too much. He was staggering forward, Tadao and his creatures being ripped a distance away from his protection. Izuku had to assume that his best friend was fine and kept pushing forward. Shoto pushed out a slick layer of ice, causing Izuku's feet to slide out from underneath his body. He fell to his stomach painfully, one arm still extended outwards to block what he could of the wind. The pushing of the wind and the slick surface below Izuku caused him to start sliding away from his prey. He growled, forcing his right hand forward and launching a stream of flames to melt the ice as he guided it with force. Clambering to his feet, Izuku began forward again, stronger this time as the living tanks fought farther and farther away. He called out to Shoto. Shame you only use your ice. You could be much stronger, Shoto, if you fought with your fire as well. The teen gritted his teeth at the mention of his father's flames, sending another wave of ice. Izuku burned through it without much thought as he steadily advanced. I hear your flames are especially hot, and I am dreadfully curious if my own are an equal. Whatever game you are trying to play, villain, it will not work. Shoto warned. All Might's and Nomu's fight was drawing to a close, the heroes' shouts echoing throughout the building. Even by only using your ice, you're letting your father use you. Bunny was close enough to see Shoto's eyes widen in shock. He allowed himself a triumphant smirk for sowing another seed of doubt. He planted his feet on the ground, halting only a few meters away from his opponent, and spoke in an almost friendly manner. I do wish that you could see how he's manipulating you. I find it quite revolting. Just remember, I know how to help you. As he finished speaking, All Might finally got the upper hand on Nomu. The monster was blasted through the glass dome overhead and Izuku leapt backwards with force, retaking his spot near Tamura. All the friendliness slowly drained from his expression, until he was left to glare in loathing at the triumphant hero. His wrath was shared by his commander as All Might turned and stared them down, still holding on to enough energy to sustain his bulked form. So, you actually beat the weapon designed to kill you. Heh, Shigaraki's chuckle was tainted by the hatred in his tone. I almost want to applaud you. All Might stood prouder, a grin glued onto his face. True heroism always finds a way to succeed, ensuring the safety and happiness of the common people. He boasted, unaware that Izuku, one who he had crushed, was the jacketed villain before him. Everything I do is for the benefit of others. Is it? Shigaraki wasn't the one speaking this time. It was the quiet, heavy voice of Bunny. Everything you say? He stepped forward. What about those kids and teens and adults who are cast away by society? What about those who dream of being a hero, only to have every hope they posse's crushed? What have you done about them? He took another step forward, tones of madness lacing his strange voice. Hiding his shock, All Might spoke what he knew his students needed to hear. He hoped it was what the criminal before him needed as well. I do what I can to help them should I ever come across any. I act how I think it'll benefit them most in their future. Echiche. The laugh ripped from Izuku's throat, guttural and insane. It grew to mind-boggling measures, even making Eagle take a step backwards. The laugh reached a higher pitch, sounding akin to a banshee cackle, as Izuku brought his hands up to cradle his face once more. He must have laughed for a solid minute, gales of demonic laughter pealing through the entirety of the building. They finally petered to a stop, Izuku mimicking wiping away a tear. You know, I think I might just have to agree with you on that. He grinned sardonically. My life has never been better. Bakugo leapt forward, screaming in rage. And who do you think you are to blame yourself on All Might? Izuku didn't even look to Katsuki. Reaching out, he pulled the volatile teen to the ground, pressing on him harshly with force. Oh, do shut up. You're the worst of them all. All Might moved to step in, but halted as Izuku lifted the pressure from off of and shoved Katsuki away. Bunny's glare never left All Might's eyes. Bunny, Shigaraki spoke once again, voice oddly calm. Yes, Tamura? His voice was heavy, knowing the command about to come and nearly whining like a dog to have it. Kill him. Izuku didn't bother to respond. He shot forward, propelling himself with force while flames jetted out of his mouth, white hot and ready to destroy. His hand was stretched out, desperately wanting to lay hold on the hero so as to finally end the hypocritic life. The chance was ripped away from him in the form of a bullet ripping through his hand. Izuku screamed, tumbling to his knees from pain he had never experienced before. 3 more sharp cracks sounded from the entrance steps, Shigaraki falling to the ground as well. Kurogiri acted quickly, pushing a wall of mist up and around his two charges. Izuku somehow shook his senses back into order, examining his hand. The bullet had passed clean through, allowing Izuku's healing quirk to start its work without hindrance. Bunny looked up, spotting All Might through the mist. "I hate you." He spoke above the new clamor of the teachers as the mist surrounded his body. "I'll come back for you one day, All Might, I swear it." The hero's face was made of stone, steam venting from his body, and Izuku was swallowed by the dark mist. Across Japan, Izuku snapped back to reality, appearing in the old bar. He tentatively shuffled to his commander, tending to Shigaraki's wounds as Tadao sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Shot in both arms and legs, all those underlings wiped out, even Nomu was beaten. "We failed. Those kids were so strong." Shigaraki raged as much as he could, slowly lifting his head to stare at the lone television screen. And the symbol of peace wasn't weakened at all. "You were wrong, Master, so wrong." Izuku pulled his hands away in shock, surprised that Shigaraki would lash out against their sensei. He resumed his work of removing the bullets as All for One's calm voice spoke out. "No, I wasn't. We weren't just as prepared as we should have been." The guttural voice of the doctor spoke up in agreement, asking where Nomu was. "Yes, why is he not with you?" Kurogiri explained, enraged at All Might for removing such an important piece of their puzzle. The doctor and All for One discussed the news, displeased as Izuku finished removing the bullets from Shigaraki's body. The ancient villain turned his attention back into his pupil as Tamura let out a groan of pain. "Naturally you're upset, Tamura. Gather the villainous elite, take all the time you need. I must remain hidden in the shadows, so you must be my face for now. A symbol of your own." As All for One soothed his petulant student, Izuku busied himself in massaging and tending to the wounds as he healed them. Sensei was placing a fair deal of responsibility on Tamura's shoulders, but the inspiring nature and power of his words diffused any doubts he may have had concerning this placement. "Next time, well, show them that you are to be feared." Izuku glowered down at his ice water, mulling over yesterday's failed attempt at the USJ. They had been so close. If only there had been less talking. Izuku could have been able to duel All Might before the teachers arrived. If only Katsuki hadn't decided to show his ugly face, something might have become of Kurogiri's quick thinking. Dragging a hand down his face with a profound sigh, Izuku supposed some good had come of the event. He'd installed doubt into Kirishima's and Todoroki's mind, a small seed to be sure, but seed nonetheless. Tadao looked over at his small friend from where he stood painting a landscape on the wall for practice, much to Giri's annoyance. "You good lil bro? I've a headache for meeting Master," Izuku mumbled, rubbing his temples. He had indeed been called to his master's presence, to learn new techniques for his quirks, new strategies and new suggestions, and All for One had kept Izuku captivated for the better part of 2 hours. It was a humbling honor to kneel before All for One, scribbling his master's teaching dutifully in his notebook and being chastised for answering in a less than ideal fashion. At the end, Izuku was allowed to present his few questions, prodding the mystery of All for One's quirk. Izuku didn't love his master and knew he was not the recipient of any form of sympathy. All for One only needed a pawn. Izuku was simply drawn to power. Irresistible, like a hot shower after a day's hard work, or moths to an electric trap. Kaken, All Might, Tadao, All for One, Izuku couldn't keep himself from being lured in by their confidence and strength. Power was indescribably beautiful to him, regardless of how lowly the wielder of that power treated him. And this beauty was the reason he sat hunched at the bar counter, nursing a headache and foul mood. Kurogiri slid 2 painkillers to his young charge's hand and stepped back to preparing dinner. "You know, Master and I have been debating and we have discovered a small problem." Tadao and Izuku both looked to the bartender, eyebrows raised. "It involves you two. Your friendship in particular." Eagle squinted at Kurogiri, wary. "What do you mean?" He spoke slowly as if expecting a violent plot twist. The man of mist set down their plates of dinner quietly, waiting a moment to choose how best to explain his problem. "You two are incredibly close, that much is obvious and is something truly meant to be treasured. However, this hampers your fighting as you two are too concerned for the other's well-being. We have been training you two almost entirely separately, so you don't know each other's limits and strengths." "I suppose you're right." Izuku nodded slowly, eyes drifting away from the bartender to the counter again. Since joining the League, and especially with having to deal with school at UA and spying for the League, Izuku felt he didn't know his best friend as well as he should anymore. He and Tadao shared a glance before he turned back to Kurogiri. "What do you have in mind?" "Training you together by having you fight and compete with each other." The two shared another glance. They had never fought very much before. They had trained before joining the league, but that mostly consisted of throwing and dodging punches, running exercises and light parkour. Combat with and without quirks, obstacle courses of the same, strategy games and tests, anything Master and I can think of. We will start tomorrow. Kurogiri picked up the last plate of food, opening a portal into Shigaraki's room and depositing the plate there. Tadao stood and stretched, having set down his paint and brush and popped his back into place. He strolled over to the counter and sat next to Aizu, beginning to eat. Well, sounds like a mean plan. I'm on board. He turned as Izuku grumbled his agreement. I'm going to go work on the project after dinner and mark new mural areas along the way. Wanna come? We haven't had a good spree in a while. Bunny pushed himself upwards into a more refined sitting position, smiling at the prospect of some good fun for once. With Ida? Ida sat down at his home desk, frowning lightly at a blank sheet of paper. Izuku's bland mood throughout the day at school had rubbed off on Ida, making an already tense day horribly sullen, like eating burnt toast on a day where pouring rain had cancelled your fun plans. But Ida was not depressed, no, he was thinking. About yesterday's attack, to be specific. For some reason, the teenage villain, Bunny as he was called, stuck uncomfortably in Ida's mind. He hadn't seen much, but the criminal seemed familiar in a way that Ida couldn't place. Something he had seen before in the teen's insane personality. Then there was Izuku's behavior. Ida could think of no rational reason for Izuku to be so upset. Distressed and unsettled by the events that had taken place perhaps, but not so angry. Ida shook his head, adjusting the paper before him and beginning to write. He often found that scribbling down whatever was bothering his mind helped him think more clearly, allowing other work to be done, getting the problems out of his head, and also organizing his thoughts in perhaps a more rational form. He wrote studiously. Midoriya, unexplainable mood, sullen attitude, depressed sort of anger, former friend of the villain Eagle. Bunny, familiar? Insane, ruthless, despises All Might Sensei quirk? Close friend and associate of same Eagle, incredibly intelligent, beaten for now. Sighing, about to fold the paper and set it aside, Ida remembered one detail about the villain that his classmates had told him. Bunny laughed, often maniacally, while covering his face with his hands. With a start, Ida realized Izuku did the exact same. Ida hastily scribbled the thought down onto both lists, contemplating the two names in a new light. His trail of thought ventured down a dangerous path of comparing the two people associated. Supposing they were the same, though Ida wasn't 50% sure with his newfound suspicion, it would explain Midoriya's foul mood and the feeling of knowing the villain. They were both great strategists, was or is in close ties with Eagle, laughed the same, even had the same body type. Both also seemed to carry some form of grudge for Bakugo, and neither was afraid of showing it. However, there was the blatant fact that Midoriya was quirkless and Bunny was quite powerful. He seemed to possess 3, perhaps 4 different quirks. Maybe they were related, but Ida couldn't see them as being the same person. Bunny was a ruthless, powerful villain and Izuku was a quirkless sweetheart. Ida shook the idea out of his head, folding the paper and dropping it into his drawer. He slid his homework out of his school bag and set to work, trying to concentrate on English for a test in the morning. Back to Aizu and Tats. Wrapped in their respective gear, Bunny and Eagle made short work of crossing the city to the project. They stopped a handful of times, marking out new areas for murals along their way. There was a comforting atmosphere to travel together again, like in the happy and simple days before they joined Shigaraki, getting sucked into the drama. Neither had realized how much they missed their simple alone time to revel in their friendship. A thought crossed Izuku's mind. He frowned, pulled on Tadao's sleeve, and the two slowed down to a simple walk, hands in pockets. What's up? I've been thinking about your quirk and I've noticed something. Izuku gestured as he spoke in a quiet, casual manner. While your quirk is incredibly useful in combat, it is so useful only if you have paintings nearby, say on your person or on the wall or ground. All this art we keep putting up is essentially useless unless you happen to be fighting nearby, and you can only keep so many painteds alive at one time, so keeping up a small army in the basement is also out. Granted, 50 a relatively large number, but far from small army levels and impractical all the same. They were nearing an old abandoned parking building. Izuku and Tadao jumped in through the destroyed wall, sliding down a prepared rope that led straight to the bottom level through a series of holes in the floors. Landing heavily, their presence sent the few hiding low lives scattering away as they stepped forward in a casual confidence and a loud command for them to leave. The two were well known among these people, and the simple low lives didn't dare argue, dragging their tents and bags away. You can't keep exiting battle to replenish your stock, Tad, you'll get in trouble. Izuku looked up to his friend in worry, shaking a can of dark brown paint. And what about this? We won't exactly be able to ferry this back to base, nor do we have space to keep it there. You can't run over here and then meet us with it in battle, 'cause you'd alert the authorities on the way here and give away any chance of surprise, and we need you to be on the front lines to begin with. Izuku gestured to the floor as he spoke. On the cement was traced the skeletal outline of their project. Tadao could have done this by himself if it weren't for the painting's sheer size, which was why Izuku was needed in order to make sure the dimensions were perfect. The length of the painting stretched nearly from wall to wall, and that was with its two sides folded in half, ending only a few meters short. The width occupied half of the distance between the other two walls, the monstrosity they were creating destined to cause chaos by its mountainous body. Tadao nodded, frowning slightly as he knelt down to begin his work. You're right. We'll have to find some way around that. Put your big brain to work, yeah? He gave Izuku a playful nudge, the two laughing happily. You got the other colors, yeah? This baby's gonna need a lot. Izuku proudly displayed his bag full of assorted paint cans. The two busily set themselves to work, determined to use most, if not all, of the paint before they left. Izuku and Tadao focused mainly on filling out more of the base, saving details until after they were sure that the main form was finished. It was quite some time before any meaningful conversation resumed. Hey Izu, you excited for the festival? That's only a few days away, right? Izuku huffed, having forgotten about the event and all the drama. Oh yeah, totally skipped my mind. I suppose I'm excited enough. My friend, Shinso, I've told you about him, yeah? He's way more pumped than I am. He's hoping to do well enough to get into the hero course. You gonna try for the same? Snorting with incredulous laughter, Izuku shook his head. Not a chance. I'm just going 'cause I have to, and I'm going to do my best, not matter what. Tadao smiled, spraying thick lines on the floor. Wish I could go to watch you in person. You most certainly will not. Izuku's head shot upwards, blood rushing. Izu, I'm not serious, I know dash. That's a stadium filled to the brim with heroes, and you're a recorded criminal. I know, let me finish dash. You wouldn't even get into the stadium, you'd get arrested in minutes dash. I knew. Tadao set down his can with a groan, looking over to his young friend. His hand, stained brown with paint, landed on his jeans, adding a clear handprint over the other paint stains. I was merely saying I wish I could be there. I know that I can't, you dork. Oh. Eagle laughed, shoulders shaking with his mirth as Izuku joined in awkwardly. I'll be just fine with watching you compete on the crappy TV screen in my room at the bar. Now get back to work, lil genius. I want to leave at a semi-reasonable time tonight. It was 2 in the morning when they left finally, Izuku pushing their tired bodies up to the street with force. Tadao had Kurogiri warped the young teen to his house as he left for the bar. Izuku slipped into his house softly, making sure not to wake his mother. Sneaking into his room, he closed the door as gently as possible and sank into his bed with a groan. He didn't even bother to change out of his outfit. He was too tired and he'd already laid down, thereby losing all motive to get back onto his feet again. Izuku groaned into his pillow as the textbooks on his desk reminded him of the English test he had to take in the morning. Perhaps staying out so late was a mistake. Dude, you look like a zombie. Are my bad sleeping habits rubbing off on you? Shinso slid into the seat next to a brain-dead Izuku. The secret criminal had major bags under his eyes from his shenanigans of last night. He sat slumped in his chair, hand pressing into his face to keep it elevated off of his desk. Yeah, I was just up late last night. You're not getting sick again, are you? Mia, having just entered, stood next to Izuku and held a delicate hand to his forehead. You're a little cold. Izuku looked up at Mia under her hand, managing a smile. No, I was just up late trying to relax. I'm sorry if I was rude yesterday. I didn't mean offense. His friend smiled and hand-waved the apology, saying it was nothing, that everyone has bad days sometimes. Izuku relaxed, happy that he had such kind and supportive friends. Shinso and Tadao were no doubt his closest, next being Mia and Ochako. Izuku found Ida to be quite distant with him, but it was not a bother when Izuku saw Shinso light up and smile to see him. However, Ida seemed to have developed a strange new suspicion of Izuku, having asked the smaller teen earlier at lunch if Izuku had any siblings. Izuku had denied this and asked why Ida wanted to know, but was met by a hasty redirection of the spectacled teen asking the others about their families. Shinso sat up in his chair, a new light in his eyes. It's only a couple more weeks away though, guys. This same purple-haired teen blushed at their giggles at his behavior, which was similar to a kid being proffered his favorite candy bar. What? This is my big shot to get into the hero course, why wouldn't I be excited? Izuku's chuckles petered out as he leaned back into his chair and crossed his arms. Sorry buddy. You do have every reason to be excited. Have you been following those exercise tips I gave you? He was referring to a couple days ago when he had worked out a training schedule for Shinso to follow in order to up his chances of winning. Izuku had just learned at the time of his friend's fervent wish to enter the hero course, and had spent the afternoon creating the sheet. Yeah, it's really tiring. But I can tell it's working cause I've been feeling slightly more energized recently, which, you know, is incredibly rare for me unless I drink like 5 shots of espresso. Mia shuddered. That's really unhealthy. Shinso shrugged, apathetic. Hey, it gives me energy, doesn't it? Izuku shook his head and smirked, happy to listen as his two best normal friends argued over the logistics and health of 5 shots of espresso over exercise. It was good to feel like a normal kid again. That day seemingly couldn't make up its mind whether to fly by or drag on and on. Izuku was tired, having been busy juggling to keep up with high school and providing the league with secretive info. He was unaccustomed to this much snooping and lurking. But, oh, at long last, the end of that long day was over. As soon as they stepped outside their classroom when the last class was dismissed, the 3 friends and their classmates noticed the large mob of students congregating around 1A's door. Katsuki's voice echoed over the crowd, usual brash tones as abrasive as they always were, making Izuku shiver unconsciously. He wasn't confident like he was when being bunny, and Kaken still intimidated Izuku greatly. Ida's voice rang out next as Shinso pushed his way to the front of the crowd. So this is Class 1A? I heard you guys were impressive but you just sound like a jerk. Is everyone in the hero course delusional or just you? How sad to come here and find a bunch of egomaniacs. Shinso mumbled as he talked, all mirth having left his voice. Izuku hung back, wanting to stop his friend from doing something to set Bakugo off, but too afraid to enter the teen's sightline to do so. I wanted to be in the hero course, but like many others here I was forced to choose a different track. Such is life. I didn't make it the first time around, but I have a second chance. If any of us do well in the festival, the teachers may decide to transfer us to the hero course, and they'll have to transfer others out to make room. Scouting the competition? Shinso cast a look across the spellbound classroom, observing their shocked expressions. Maybe some of my peers are, but I'm here to tell you that if you don't bring your very best, I'll steal your spot right from under you. This is a declaration of war. The air grew electric from the brash statement, 1A and many of the onlookers jerking back in surprise. Enough was enough. Come on, Shin. Fearful or not, Izuku laid his hand on the purple-haired teen's shoulder, smiling slightly. Let's go already. Mom might worry if I'm late again. Not to flinch when Katsuki growled a low and threatening Deku, was quite the challenge, a challenge Izuku failed. He was saved however by Tetsu loudly declaring his presence, allowing Mia, Shinso and Izuku to slip away, showing his friends off to his mother and Tadao's father, who often came over to see Inko, was a great way to relive stress. They laughed and talked well into the night, discussing their individual plans for high school, Shinso's drive to be a hero, Izuku's just wanting to survive school, and how Mia was only in UA to get the best education available to her. Izuku and his mother were the perfect ideals of gracious hosts. The food was perfect, dessert simply divine, and they all shamelessly stuffed themselves full then kept on going. Nothing beats home food made with love. As Izuku and Inko waved their guests off, she leaned over to her son and proudly whispered, "You've made such beautiful friends, sweetie. I'm so proud of you, baby." He laid in bed that night, thinking of his great friends, reading along as Tadao berated him with a story of Shigaraki's crap, and Izuku Midoriya couldn't have been happier. Time skip, festival day? It was a grand entrance to be sure, trumpets blaring, crowd cheering, students filling onto the field in mild surprise. Izuku had never been exposed to so much excitement over himself. He was almost strutting with pleasure. Unconsciously looking for Tadao, Izuku gazed up into the crowd. He had to make sure that of the hundreds of people in the sea of faces, his friend wasn't one of them. Tadao would have been arrested for sure, and Izuku would have dropped everything, his guys at UA, the lie about his quirk, his identity as Bunny, all to help Tadao escape, and the league couldn't suffer that kind of setback. Separated into their specific areas, the students looked up at the podium as Pro Hero Midnight stepped onto the stage. Izuku bluntly stared down at his red shoes. He was not looking up. No sir. Not for 100 yen. He was his mommy's good little angel and he was not looking up. Izuku knew Tadao was laughing at him. He was watching the festival on a screen and laughing at Izuku's totally not beat red face. Wait, no, that was Shinso laughing. Izuku dug his elbow into the other teen's ribs and listened to the instructions for the festival that day. He still did not look up as Midnight proceeded to call Kaken to the stage. Izuku's head shot upwards, eyes locked Kong onto his Ulf bully. Looking bored more than anything else, Katsuki slouched up onto the podium. He stood at the mic for a long second before finally opening his mouth to blatantly announce, "I just want to say I'm gonna win." The crowd and respective students all reacted as well as you would think. That is to say, very badly. Many booed and jeered Ida, stepping forward to emphatically call Katsuki out on his statement. Even Kirishima didn't seem too pleased with his friend. Izuku was disgusted, his stomach turning in knots to the point where he thought he might actually get sick. The brash confidence, the rude nature, everything simply radiated Katsuki's true toxic nature. The boy turned and he and Izuku locked eyes. Katsuki held his hand out, jerking his thumb downwards. "It's not my fault that you all are stepping stones to my victory." It was as if an electric shock ran through Izuku, breaking through his walls of fear. It was that instant that finally made Izuku crack. Up until then he'd been sheltered and protected from Kaken technically against his will. He would have never fought against their worries, but in technicality he was always just pulled along. But Katsuki's look, that thumb down, his statement, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was that instant that Izuku decided, once and for all, he was done with Kaken. Izuku wouldn't just win the tournament, oh no. He would destroy that Katsuki Bakugo, humiliate him, steal away what Katsuki wanted most, to be the undeniable champion. Even if Izuku somehow lost, he would make sure that doubt was piled onto his tormentor, until one of them broke. Izuku was already broken however, and Katsuki was only barely holding himself together. Izuku would utterly obliterate that liar until only shards remain. He smiled up at Katsuki, a strange new glint in his eyes. Kaken blinked, hiding his surprise as he stepped off the stage. Few minutes later, the students, pushed together, crouched, ready to run. They were preparing for the start of the relay race as Izuku turned to give a reassuring look to Shinso. "Ready to give your best?" "Always," was the reply. "We'll probably get separated. Keep going. I'll make sure to get to the next round and then the next." Izuku nodded and the whistle blew and pandemonium reigned. Kids shoved, pushed, and pulled, desperately trying to exit to free space. Izuku was jostled about like a rag doll, finally causing him to push lightly with force to allow just a few precious centimeters of a breathing area. With his new shield he began pushing forward more, crawling his way to the front. Cheating slightly perhaps, but no one could tell in this chaos, and if no one saw, Izuku didn't care. Most of them didn't know him or his quirk status anyway, so even if they did notice against rather high odds, they'd just pass it off as his quirk or that they missaw. All that mattered was getting out of this suffocating horde, and Izuku was far from an angel anymore. A little cheating had never hurt him before. He didn't see why it should now. As they reached the end of the tunnel, a sudden sheet of ice spread across the ground. The few with mobility quirks ran ahead of those who slipped and slid, Izuku continuing to push himself forward with force. A constant mantra of, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going running on loop on his head. He slid/skated on the thin ice, balancing himself with force and old childhood practice. He had always enjoyed venturing out onto frozen puddles and fields during winter as a child, and had become quite adept at walking on the surface without ice skates. He reached the end of the ice, followed by some of his more courageous peers, only to be greeted by a small army of gigantic robots. A rather daunting sight for those kids who had never been in a faux villain attack before. Izuku went weak at the knees. All his combat training suddenly flew out of the window at the sight of those metal monstrosities. It was then that a sudden blast of cold zoomed past Izuku. He knew that power. Shoto Todoroki instantly froze the entirety of the largest faux villain, displaying the strength of his quirk. Running on, indifferent to any danger, Shoto left his fellow students behind. Izuku shook himself, determined to persevere. Cautiously, having force ready should be needed it at a moment's notice as help, Izuku followed suit and ran after the others. He moved around the monstrous mechanisms as best he could, grabbing a large sheet of metal and fastening it across his chest. Other students engaged the robots in combat, some being trapped under the frozen mechanism as it fell. Commotion and clangs rang throughout the air, chaos running tyrant over rationality. Izuku ran on, sprinting to cover lost ground. He'd lost sight of his opponents, the ones that mattered at least, and that was unacceptable. He couldn't just promise to do his best, vow to finally destroy Kaken, only to come in anything less than first place. Both Todoroki and Katsuki were nothing to Izuku now, only stumbling blocks he had to fix so he could win. Right now they didn't matter, only the prize. Izuku had lost sight of Shinso and Mia as well, and a small knot of worry twisted his stomach. He knew Mia was in great physical shape for one not in the hero course, and she loved to run most of all, but it was mainly Shinso Izuku worried over. The purple-themed teen may be working more towards fitness, but he still had a long way to go, and physically demanding efforts such as this were far from his chosen forte. Izuku ran on, however, sticking to what Shinso had said. "We'll probably get separated. Keep going. I'll make sure to get into the next round and then the next. I have to trust that they're both doing their best and keep going forward. I promised Tadao and myself now that nothing would get in the way of my best." The next obstacle, a crevice with large stone pillars linked with cables. Most of the kids were traversing these distances with uncertainty, eyeing the drop. Others, such as Tsuyu and a pink-haired girl, made the gaps look easy. Izuku ventured onto a cable of his own, making sure he was balanced before he even contemplated the first step. Once situated, he was able to cross the distance with significantly more ease than his peers, having trained for such an occurrence as this with Kurogyuri and Tadao a few days prior. Again on solid ground, Izuku sped forward, pumping his legs, reducing the distance to his final obstacle. The sounds of distant explosions did not reassure him, and he had every reason to worry. A minefield. An honest-to-goodness minefield. In a race for children. Who thinks of this stuff? Izuku, however, had no time for indignation. Todoroki and Katsuki were at the front of the field, slowed down by the danger, but if they got to the end before Izuku did, his chances were over. He scanned the ground, willing his brain to kick into overdrive, to provide him with something. "When I get out of here, I'll blow up your hide so bad there'll be pieces of you across Japan." Blow up, explosions, mines, and Izuku was carrying an oversized shovel across his back. All he needed was simply more explosives. Yeah, that's a normal train of thought for this kind of situation. Inko would surely be pleased when she learned that Izuku wanted literal bombs. This is the dumbest plan ever conceived. Stupidity to the winds, however. Desperate times require desperate measures and plans, and Izuku had nothing else at this point. He dug furiously, carefully, compiling a near-beautiful pile of mines. It was near-beautiful in its unlimited potential for mayhem, his inner psycho getting far too excited at the prospect. Izuku cast a quick glance upwards, realizing the limited amount of time left to him. He took one preparing step backwards, hardening his gaze. "Thanks for the idea, Kaken." Izuku ran forward, abandoning caution and reason. "I'll make sure you don't win this time." The explosion was enormous, shaking the ground in an immense quake. The plume of pink smoke erupted, causing the two leaders to turn and look. One small figure was shot from the smoke, hurtling over Shoto's and Kaken's heads. Izuku clinging tightly to his sheet of metal. Katsuki screamed bloody murder, forgetting safety and rocketing himself forward with his quirk, Shoto following suit. Izuku began to fall, and he found himself in need of a new plan. At this rate he'd fall flat on his head, probably breaking his spine and at least fracturing his skull, set off more explosions and get thrown around like a piece of lettuce in a salad. More explosions? Time for Dumb Idea, the returning sequel, I guess. Izuku wasn't sure how he kept managing to have these incredibly sarcastic thoughts in such a tense situation, but he didn't have the time to question it currently. He pivoted in mid-air, raising his hands and the metal sheet in accordance, above his head. "I can't let either of you win." He slammed the metal down right onto multiple untouched mines. He was shot forward like a bullet. He was getting disoriented by the occurrence of two large explosions happening right underneath him, but he retained enough sense for one final cheat this round. At the last possible moment, Izuku had, slightly brashly and without thinking, pushed diagonally on his two opponents. This propelled him forward and knocked them to the side, setting off more mines. He landed and rolled, having abandoned his metal piece in favor of running with as little tying him down as possible. Katsuki and Shoto screamed behind him, but he focused solely on running as fast as he could. Ignoring the death threats and telltale explosions, Izuku stretched his arm out, as if the added length of less than 1 meter would help him any. He was so close. His and the others' feet thundered against the ground. He could see the end of the hallway. Katsuki had abandoned insults. Izuku reached out once more, desperately reaching for this one victory. He needed this one, needed it so badly in a way he couldn't describe. He was almost there, Todoroki and Bakugo on his heels. There was the doorway and one crossed first. The crowd screamed. The adults stood up, shouting and cheering their emotions. They were cheering for the quirkless, the underdog, the one who had never won before in his life. They rose such a jubilant ruckus to the heavens, screaming praise for the victor. They were screaming for Izuku. He had beaten Kaken. He had come out on top. Izuku Midoriya had finally won. Not Kaken, not Todoroki, no. Izuku. Izuku stared about himself in shock, wholly unaccustomed to being viewed above someone else, to be praised so. His breath came in rapidly astonished gasps, new finishers filing into the field. Izuku's knees suddenly gave out and he face-planted into the soil. Shinso and Mia found him there, full-on watering the lawn with his tears, an ability he had gained from his mother and one he was making full use of now. "Hey Midoriya, what happened?" Shinso prodded his side, Izuku only wailing louder. "Dude, you were one of the first, weren't you?" The grass-green teen shook his head. "You weren't? Are you hurt?" Izuku shook his head again, more firmly, causing Shinso to throw his hands up in exasperation. "Then what?" Izuku drew in a wet gasp that was wholly undignified. "I won." "Oh, you were the first." Mia realized, her face lighting up. "Congratulations. You're crying over winning?" "It's first time I've ever won against Kak and Shin." Shinso winced, realizing finally what the victory meant to Izuku. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Okay, fine. I'll grant you that, but come on, man. Stop crying, you've turned the lawn into mud bath." Izuku's tears finally did come to a halt, and he was lifted to his feet, sniveling and dehydrated. Shoto and Katsuki glared at Izuku all the while, destruction clearly on the mind. The remaining students gathered around, many nursing cold water bottles to refresh themselves, or in Izuku's case to get some fluids back into his body after his cry fest. The second round was announced to be a cavalry battle, with stacking points based on which place the students finished. Mia had 1,000 points to her name, making her glow with pride. Shinso held 705 and was clearly rather surprised at his gain, and Izuku had 10 million. Izuku, once again in his life, was a very small fish surrounded by a horde of very large, hungry, cannibalistic fish. A tiny squeak rose out of his throat and was immediately drowned in the judgmental stares. Honestly, Izuku had never been so terrified in all his life as he had been at that one moment. Only a select few pairs of eyes weren't looking at him like he was a prize to capture. Two were standing right next to him. Shinso wrapped his arm protectively around Izuku's shoulders. "Come on Midoriya, let's get our team assembled quickly. Mia, you comin'?" Mia smiled and nodded, applying her game face as Izuku looked in shock at his friends. "You guys want to be my partners? Even though I'm worth so much." His whole life people had avoided him, due to Katsuki's branding him. He often forgot he had actual friends now who wouldn't cower at Bakugo or listen to him. Shinso raised an eyebrow. "Duh. You're our friend, are you not?" "Of course we'd—" No, don't start crying again. Aiza, stop. "And of course it's tactically smart." Mia piped in with her own opinion, rubbing Izuku's shoulders as he began fighting off new tears. "You're a super smart and determined guy, remember when we played volleyball? And you essentially did all the work? I think together we'll make an awesome team." A new voice rang out here, one Izuku hadn't gotten a chance to talk to much as of late. Kav. Ochako Uraraka waved her hand, gaining the friend group's attention. "Is your party full? Or do you have room for one more?" Now this was shocking for Izuku. As stated before, he hadn't gotten many chances to talk with the sweet girl, and he naturally figured she'd have closer friends in her class that she would have wanted to team up with. Uraraka? You're wanting to be on my team too?" "Sure." She simply beamed with positivity, grinning widely. "It's good to team up with friends you like, isn't it?" "Hey, what's with that face, Izuku? You look gross." Shinso laughed, both at the situation and at his friend's ridiculous face. He prodded Izuku in the ribs again. "Yeah, you can team up with us, that's the same reason we teamed up with him. And don't mind his faces. He can get really emotional really easily." "Oh wow, sorry I dash. Hey." Ochako was pushed to the side, the pink-haired girl Izuku saw at the ravine in the obstacle course shoving up right into Izuku's face. "You're the guy worth so much, yeah? Got a free space? You'd be perfect to show off all my babies. Come on, let me join." In his undignified manner of the day, Izuku fell backwards onto his butt from shock. He never got this much attention. Plus to have three rather attractive girls surrounding him, with his equally awkward and antisocial best friend next to him, Izuku honestly didn't know how to respond. He completely lost the capability of speech as well, which was wholly embarrassing. Thankfully, with her orderly demeanor and quick responses, Mia was there to save his shocked hide. "I'm sorry whoever you are. Our team is full. Uraraka here just took up the last spot." Curt but polite, Mia Yanagita, daughter to the owner of a prosperous company, held her hand out for Izuku to take. The new girl's shoulders slumped. "Oh, I see." She pulled a face, scratching her scalp. "Guess I'll have to find someone else then." Izuku muttered an apology as Mia pulled him to his feet, but the pink-haired girl was already gone. What on earth did she mean by her babies? He asked, completely baffled by the strange experience. Mia held her chin to think as they walked to collect their headbands. I think I've seen her in the mechanics group. I believe she's an inventor. As for the babies, I've seen a lot of my father's employers refer to their work similar things. Babies, darlings, little perfections, queens, the like. Your dad runs a computer company, yeah? Wouldn't all the employees just be making computers? Hitoshi asked, grabbing his 705 points. Mia smiled. Yes, most do, but in talking specifically those who are working on improvements and new designs. We also support and are thinking of investing into newer areas. Technology is a rich business, and Daddy believes it would be best if we branch out more. She moved to fasten her 1,000 points across her head, but Izuku stopped her. He had a sly look on his face. Wait a minute with that. He pulled the corner of his mouth upwards into a devilish grin. I have an idea. Soon all teams were assembled and Mike was loudly listing off those he liked best. There's Team Bakugo. Looking strong in defense, but I'm not sure how they'll do in mobility. Team Todoroki, evenly balanced as all things should be. They'll do well, I think. Interesting team up over there with Team Ojiro. With Tokoyami, Aoyama, and Hatsumi, they seem to be centered on defense and mobility. And what's Midoriya doing? What Izuku was doing was taking the position as head horse. Shinso was behind him to his left, Uraraka on his right, and Mia sat on top, looking mildly stunning as the sun reflected off of the multicolored highlights for her white hair. Izuku's heart was thumping away in his chest. His nerves were rising. Trying to calm himself, Izuku rationalized that even if his plan failed, they should still have enough points to get into the final round. Just not first place. He needed that spot. He had to prove Katsuki wrong. Midoriya, who is worth 10 million, gave up his points to his classmate Mia Yanagida. What is this guy thinking? I totally would have bet on him being top, he's so strong. All eyes were drawn to Mia's neck, where a mess of ones and zeros could be seen. Everyone knew that the 10 million points were there and they all wanted them. Mia shifted, her composure cracking for a second under those stares. Shinso nudged her, sending a reassuring smile her way. Don't worry, Mia. Izuku knows what he's doing. She drew her mouth into a line, nodding sharply. And with that the game began. Chaos ensued immediately. Multiple teams rushed Izuku's and he ordered his teammates to jump left. Tetsu's four-horse nearly denied them the chance to escape. Shinso slipped and almost fell as the ground turned soft underneath his step, but Izuku's well-trained body pulled his team along. Next Jiro shot at the team with her earphone jack, only to react them with a startled yelp. They were covered with an irritating substance. Mia turned and smiled, wiggling her irritating slime-covered fingers tauntingly. You didn't think Izuku left us with any good form of defense, did you? The four sped off, Uraraka's quirk activated on them so they could move faster. Her quirk was actually only used on Shinso, Mia, and herself, allowing Izuku to pull them along with his strength and a little bit of force. They halted suddenly and Shinso swore loudly. He had stepped on some weird purple ball, which must have been incredibly sticky as Shinso couldn't free himself. Instantly realizing who that came from, Izuku began frantically searching for where the assailant was. Where did that come from? Shinso demanded, still frantically trying to free his foot. Over here Midoriya. The sly voice called out, hidden in Shoji's arms. As Mineta called out, Tetsu's team closed in on the opposite side. Guys, this isn't coming loose. Shinso was starting to panic, completely at a loss as to what he should do. Savior for the third time that day, Mia leaned forward and pointed her fingers into a nozzle shape at Shinso's foot. Don't let this touch your skin. A thin jet of green dissolving acid spurted from her fingers, the matching green color highlights in her white hair slowly fading and disappearing altogether as the stream came to a halt. The acid pooled on the ground, quickly eating away the sticky ball. Quick! Izuku shouted as soon as his friend was free. Left! They bolted away, leaving the two other teams to crash into each other, Mineta loudly screaming, "No fair." Of course though, everything only grew worse from there. The physical embodiment of Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong, launched himself into the air screaming death threats and forgetting about the 10 million points to aim one terrible explosion at Izuku. That could have spelled the end for their team. Bakugo almost made it too, but a sudden stream of irritating slime blinded him. Barely saved from being disqualified by his teammates, Katsuki continued to roar and rage. He pawed at his face feral. Izuku turned and shouted thanks up to Mia, but she barely nodded in response. Her face was beginning to look flushed and it was as if she was having trouble concentrating. Her hair was quickly losing color, highlights and streaks fading as she used her quirk. Try to save up, Mia. When we make it through to the last round, you'll no doubt dash. He was cut off. Izuku's and the others' feet slid out from underneath them and they nearly fell. Once stable, Izuku chanced to look upwards. He saw who he feared to see. Todoroki, glaring gaze flicking between Izuku's shocked face and the mass of points on Mia's neck and shoulders. He growled. So, you put her on top, using her 1,000 points as a decoy in hopes that people will target that, believing it to be the 10 million and covered the 10 in among the other bands, huh? I'll admit clever. But not clever enough. Shoto stared coolly at the group before him. I'll be taking that now. Izuku scowled right back, gaze similarly flicking between Todoroki and Ida. Those two were problems. Todoroki had ruined their plans at the USJ, and Ida was clearly catching on to Izuku's secret. He could see it in the boy's looks, the second glances when he thought Izuku couldn't see. Todoroki could still be fixed, but Ida just needed to be dealt with at this point. Just try Todoroki. Ida, get ready to move. Yaoyorozu, be prepared to protect us. Izuku sensed what was about to happen. His eyes widened. Hold on. He bent his knees, focusing all his strength, a fair bit of force downwards. Uraraka. Quirk me. Kaminari let loose with indiscriminate shock, all 1.3 million volts shocking everyone in his range. Uraraka touched Izuku with her last finger just as he jumped, allowing him to carry them high above the playing field. He angled his jump so they moved closer to the middle of the arena. Todoroki scowled up at Izuku, no doubt cursing the green-haired boy's name. I need you to release us, then touch the others quickly so I can land us without anyone getting hurt, Uraraka. She nodded, clumsily releasing her quirk and reaching around frantically for the other two and herself. Landing heavily, they stumbled as they hit the ground but none fell. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. There was only so little of the game's time left, so all he had to do was keep Mia out of harm's reach. She had almost reached her quirk limit, and it was clearly taking a toll on her. Her face was definitely flushed now, only a few streaks remaining in her hair. Mia's quirk, while versatile, had only a limited amount she could use with an unhelpfully long restoring period, and using too much of her quirk in a short period of time stressed her body, often making her feel sick. This was why she never applied for the hero course, and held no aspirations for such a title. Her intelligence was her strong point. She could clearly see that she would be wholly ineffective as a hero, and her best option was to obtain the highest education available to her, and eventually take over her father's business, which had been her dream since she was a little girl. Before they had landed, Ida had moved his team to face them. He was bending forward, saying something Izuku and his teammates couldn't hear. Todoroki and the others seemed confused as to what he was saying, but they weren't given the chance to finish whatever they were asking. His engines glowing blue, Ida suddenly shot forward. There was no chance of Izuku dodging. There was barely enough time for Mia and Shoto to reach their hands out. Tugging sharply as he was pulled past, Todoroki snatched all three headbands from her neck. Shoto gave a triumphant shout, quickly attaching the headbands around his own neck. His hand met a strange substance on his neck and shoulders, which held tight to his hand until he burned it away. A blue goop stuck to his fingers, causing his hand to adhere into the shape of a fist. Todoroki looked up as Izuku swung his team around, the green-themed boy yelling fiercely. So you used some kind of sticky glue on me? Mia had suddenly started blinking a lot, her breath growing heavy. Well, it doesn't matter. You won't be able to fight through to get these points back. He was getting caught up in his premature victory, small flames subconsciously coming to life along his left side. Bakugo had seen the switch and was propelling himself towards Shoto, screaming bloody murder. Izuku raced forward as well. Todoroki calmly raised his hands in defense, left to Bakugo, right to Izuku. His eyes widened and he suddenly shut off his flames, ordering Momo to protect him, even though she was on the wrong side. With only seconds left, however, Izuku suddenly slowed. He had regained his devilish grin. The game is won. You might want to take a second look at those headbands. For Shoto was taken aback, hastily pulling off the bands to understand what Izuku meant. 3. Katsuki understood immediately. 2. The explosive teen veered his course aiming for Izuku's team instead. He screamed his old insult at the green-haired boy, who only smirked in return. 1. Shoto counted the headbands. Shinso's points, Uraraka's, and time is up. There was a loud blaring noise, Katsuki falling onto his face from shock. The crowd cheered, excited by a game so well played. They all anticipated the winner to be announced, eagerly looking to Shoto. But Shoto screamed before Mike could, anger only a cheated teenager could muster ripping out of his body. You cheated. The crowd gasped. Midoriya cheated? Shoto leapt off of his teammates, storming, nearly running over to Izuku. Izuku was about to reply, to defend himself or rub his victory in his opponent's face, but was interrupted by Mia giving a groan and slumping forward worryingly above him. He and Shinso gently lowered her to the ground, checking to see if she needed a nurse. "You lying cheating little scumbag!" Shoto screamed, among worse insults which I shall refrain from writing. Midnight stepped in, walking just as briskly towards the angered teen. "Young Todoroki, stand down, the game is over. Know your place, young man." He didn't listen. Disregarding all of society's unspoken rules, Shoto reached the team, shoving Uraraka out of his way as she tried to stop him, grabbed the headband from Mia's head and ripped it away. She yelped in pain, Izuku and Shinso moving to her defense. There, in Shoto's hand, the numbers having been hid by Mia's white hair which had been held in place by bobby pins, was the 10 million points. That was when Shoto lost control. His flames shot back to life, burning away the last of Mia's sticky resin. He became deaf to everything around him, raging. Anger and pure fury burning within him even more intensely than his fire. He had lost twice now to this quirkless boy who was insisting on getting in Shoto's way. He had to prove to his scumbag of a father that he could win without his flames. His mother's ice was more than powerful enough. Yet Midoriya had kept ruining his plans, knocking them apart. Midoriya had also, abandoning the past and metaphorical for the physical and current sense, punched Shoto in the face with all his strength and broke the boy's nose. Todoroki fell backwards, landing on his butt. Izuku stood over him, blood from Shoto's broken nose staining his fist, and started yelling back at the other boy at the top of his lungs. Todoroki growled, returning the accusations. This took place only in a matter of seconds, and was ended just as quickly as Midnight gassed them both. Looking down in disappointment at them, she raised her whip upwards sharply. Midoriya did not cheat. He cleared his plan with me beforehand and I granted it. He and his team progressed to first place. However, such behavior is never condoned here on UA grounds, and no matter how just they feel their actions were, both boys will be heavily reprimanded for such childish fighting. Childish was hardly how the onlookers would have described that event, given the terrible things said, but Mike played his role to distract the massive crowd. So, after that spot of drama, Team Yanagita takes first place, Team Todoroki second, Team Bakugo third, and Team Ojiro fourth. He listed this all off as Izuku and Shoto were carried off the field, Shinso gently leading Mia to the nurse. This means that the lucky kids progressing to the third and final round are as follows: Yanagita, Shinso, Uraraka, Midoriya, Todoroki, Kaminari, Yaoyorozu, Ida, Bakugo, Shiro, Ashido, Kirishima, Ojiro, Aoyama, Hatsumi, and last but not least Tokoyami. Let's give these kids a round of applause and let's go get some lunch. All that said, Mike pulled off his headset and leaned over to Aizawa. Those three really got into it, huh? Have you had anger problems with them before? Shota pulled his mouth into a line underneath his bandages, talking underneath the roaring crowd. Midoriya is not my student, he's in 1C. I've only seen him a few times and he always seemed like a nice kid, always with his friends. Todoroki has always been reserved. I've never seen him smile, he didn't even get excited during the USJ attack. Bakugo has always been a problem, however. He blows up, literally, at the drop of a hat, and you and I know his past with Midoriya. He was silent for a moment. This will be a tense final round. Possibly the most dramatic one we've had in years. Dang. Mike stood and stretched. Well, I'm famished. Wanna go get lunch? Also, can I use that line, most dramatic finale in years, for the opener? Sure, whatever. Meanwhile, on the other end of the stadium, a disturbed Toshinori was rising from his seat. Young Midoriya. He remembered that kid. His determination, frail form, the broken look in his eyes when All Might told him that he couldn't become a hero. At the time, Toshinori believed that, while perhaps a little cruel, it was in the boy's best interests. Now, after seeing the child win twice in a row, with no close competition in second place, he wasn't as sure. Leaving so soon? Don't you wish to stay and discuss the games? Nizu asked, looking up with that strange smile and look. He of course knew what had the frail man so disturbed. I just need some fresh air. All Might lied, catch up with you later. He needed to get his thoughts in order about this boy. It was at lunch that Izuku reunited with his friends, a deathly silent Shoto following behind. Shinso leapt to his feet, ready to rush and greet his friend. He stopped as soon as his eyes landed on Todoroki, his gleeful expression hardening into one of mistrust and defense. Izuku's face was equally tight as he stepped to the side. He cast a go-on look to Shoto. The double-corked teen stepped up, swallowing his pride. He bent his head down in a half-bow. His voice was carefully neutral as he was clearly restraining himself. I am here to offer my apologies for my coarse actions in the previous round. I forgot my place. He straightened, waiting for an answer. And? Shoto started. And? His tone turned to accusatory surprise. I was under the impression that I had only to apologize to your team. Izuku continued, face unchanging. Midnight might have forced us to apologize to each other and the other's teammates, but I want another. His eyebrows scrunched together, indicating the anger he was still suppressing. We hid the points with bobby pins, you pulled Mia's hair and when she was sick no less. I dare say she deserves an apology. Pulling his mouth into a line, Shoto turned himself to face Mia head-on as she tried to dissuade Izuku from what he declared. Todoroki bent himself in half, bowing properly. I must apologize to you especially. I lost control of myself. Having a sister of my own, I should have known better, and restrained myself from acting and treating you how I did. Each sentence was curt and tight, Shoto clearly having to force them out of his mouth. Mia waved her hands placatingly, smiling awkwardly. It's fine truly. I forgive you and your actions. Shoto quickly returned to standing straight, looking dead ahead. To make up for damaged relationships, you could eat lunch with us? He shook his head sharply, finally giving her his gaze. I would prefer to eat by myself, but thank you for the offer. On the same note, I feel my presence would only add more tension. And without a farewell he left. Izuku and Shinso finally relaxed and slid into their seats. Slightly weakened and out of it from Midnight's quirk, Izuku started shoveling his food down as Shinso growled something under his breath about Todoroki. Though Midoriya couldn't hear, Mia apparently could. Don't say such things, Shinso. It's in the past and he came and apologized. Holding grudges is rather unhero-like in my opinion. He only came because Midnight told him to. Shinso argued softly, still in protective mode of Mia. He pulled your hair and you nearly threw up twice in the nurse's office. At this Izuku turned to Mia, eyes searching for any sign of illness. How are you doing? Do you think you'll be able to fight in the next round? Rubbing her neck, she turned her head up to take a look at the sky. I've recovered well enough. As for fighting? I'm not sure. I used more of my quirk than I thought I would have needed to, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to restock, shall we say in time. Regardless, I'll do my best, keeping my personal honor first, and I of course urge you two to do the same as well. Her two friends nodded sharply, faces drawn and ready to fight for victory. Izuku, eat more slowly, the last thing we need is you eating too quickly and getting sick. And Shinso, you need to actually start eating. You can't fight on an empty stomach. Soon they were all once again assembled on the field, awaiting the announcement of the third and final game. Midnight was on the stage, soaking in all the attention. She flailed her whip about, adding unnecessary flair as the third round was announced. A tournament. Izuku nodded, sizing up his possible opponents. He could do well in a tournament, given his slight cheating and training with Kurogyri. Fighting most of them shouldn't be difficult, though Izuku didn't doubt that Todoroki and Bakugo would find this just as easy. But that didn't matter. Tadao was counting on him. Izuku had to win for his closest friend, and for his own desire of seeing Katsuki crushed. The giant screen flickered, revealing the first round matchups. These were as follows: Izuku and Shinso, Todoroki and Shiro, Kaminari and Mei, Ida and Mia, Mina and Aoyama, Ojiro and Momo, Kirishima and Tokoyami, Bakugo and Uraraka. Studying the screen as a pre-battle game session began, Izuku could easily predict how most of 8 battles would pan out. He may not know what his friend's quirk was, but Izuku didn't have much doubt that he could beat Shinso, who was rather athletically challenged in a one-on-one fight. Todoroki would easily destroy Shiro, no question there. Kaminari had the potential to beat Mei in her inventions, but he was simply too stupid. All she would have to do is avoid his first attack, which would no doubt be an indiscriminate shock, and then take him out and move on to the next opponent to better show off her inventions. Either Mia or Ida could win. Mia was incredibly smart but slightly sick still. Ida was well trained but perhaps a bit headstrong. Mina could easily take out Yuga if she used her head, and Izuku was betting on Ojiro besting Momo by pressing her with attacks and pushing her out of the ring. Kirishima and Tokoyami could, in all honesty, go either way in Izuku's opinion. And Katsuki against Uraraka? Izuku didn't want to admit it, but he knew that Bakugo would win. There was no way he would let himself lose. Izuku could only hope that Uraraka had some brilliant plan up her sleeve. He strangely found himself desperately wanting to avoid seeing her defeated to such a base level. He wasn't sure why. Izuku shook himself of these strange feelings and turned to Shinso with a smile. Looks like you and I are first. You ready, Shinso? Voice turning confused, Izuku laid a hand on his friend's shoulder. The purple-haired teen's face was strained oddly, causing him to look almost constipated. Hey, are you alright? Shinso turned conflicted eyes onto Izuku, shocking the other boy. Yeah, it's just... He pulled his mouth into a line and screwed up his face. Remember Fist Day we met? I said my quirk made it so others don't trust me, turn me into a villain? I don't want to have to use that on you. I can only imagine how others will react, what conclusions they'll jump to. Izuku's face softened and he pulled Shinso to face him directly, keeping a firm hold on the other's shoulders. Look, seemingly villainous quirk in unfair battle or not, you're my best friend, Shinso. I don't give a single care about what other people may say or jump to. Nothing is going to change that you're my best friend and I respect you as such. Now, he gave Shinso a little shake, I'm going to bring my best to our fight. Are you? Shinso, taken aback by the blunt show of friendship, fumbled for a response. Yeah, I will. I'm gonna go get some fresh air to maybe calm myself down. Cool. Glowing with pride, Izuku beamed a smile, blissfully unaware the trouble he had just signed himself up for. I'm going to play in these mini-games. See you in the ring. Izuku of course shone with happiness during the mini-games he played. Unknown to him and most others, Shinso was sitting in the woods, accompanied by Tokoyami. The bird-headed boy was trying to guide Hitoshi through his inner demons of using his quirk on Izuku, and was finding the task to be quite the challenge. Playing and laughing, sitting and brooding, at that moment the two were stark contrasts of each other. Finally the time came. Shinso and Izuku stepped onto the opposing ends of the cement platform arena. Shinso's face was carefully neutral, carved marble. Izuku was grinning widely, excited to finally learn of his friend's quirk. Hitoshi had made a pointed effort not to speak of his seemingly villainous power, and Izuku had multiple theories on what it could be. And the games are ready to begin. Mike was happily screaming into the, well, Mike. The crowd was working itself into a frenzy at his words, ready to see kids fight. I don't know about you all, but after the last round, I'm betting on this becoming the most dramatic first-year finale we've seen in years. Maybe even decades. Now, on my right side we've got the quirkless conqueror Izuku Midoriya. And on my left, his tired-looking best friend Hitoshi Shinso. Two close friends, pitted in battle against each other. Who is going to win? A thrumming, pulsing heartbeat of anticipation blanketed the stadium. All could feel the beat as if a giant still-beating heart was buried beneath the field. Reverberating in Izuku's chest, the shared drum beat made Izuku's smile crank up an extra notch. He and Shinso locked eyes, Midnight raising her whip. The battle begins. Shinso wasted no time as Izuku bent to rush forward. You ready, Izuku? A strange look passed over his face, his breath catching in his lungs. As ready as Y-. Izuku, having been in the middle of lunging, slowed and stopped as he came to a stupefied halt. A mind-numbing emptiness flushed his body from head to toe, taking over every inch. His mind was suddenly cramped into one lone corner of his brain, awake but powerless. His consciousness whirled, alone, and wholly terrified of not being in control of his own body. The void where power once sat in his chest ached, and Izuku could only see his years of his living hell middle school as Katsuki's mindless play toy. One lone tear leaked out of Shinso's eye. I'm sorry, Izuku. You told me to bring my best and I have. Now would you kindly walk out of the ring? Obediently, Izuku turned. His feet stomped slowly across the stretch of cement. If he had been in control of his body, Izuku would have not doubt been hyperventilating, his internal conflict waging war on his body. Subconsciously, Izuku was fighting to break free. He did not like being powerless again, for too much about this was wrong. On the other side, however, Izuku finally fully understood Shinso's fear of using his quirk, and he couldn't help rooting for and admiring his friend's determination to win the game and progress to the hero course. But Izuku also wished to win for himself and Tadao, so why was that fact slowly being drowned by the need to support his friend here and now? The line was coming closer and closer, Izuku panicking. He fumbled for a way to break free, trying desperately to activate force in hopes that tripping and falling would sever the connection. The crowd was screaming, people yelling at Izuku to snap out of it, and at Shinso for using his power on the quirkless. Snap out of it. One voice rang out above the others, familiar. Don't you want to win? Too familiar. Come on. That voice was Tadao's. A new fear of his sudden revelation, washed over Izuku in a flood that nearly drowned him. It destroyed Shinso's control in one shocking moment, sending Izuku down onto his butt for the second time that day. He gasped, mind-checking that he was once again in control of himself. His feet sat only centimeters away from the white line and he scuttled them back frantically. Snapping his head upwards, Izuku scanned the crowd, looking for his friend he swore he heard. "Izuku?" Shinso asked, dumbfounded. "Tadao?" Izuku whispered, his head whipping back and forth like a metronome. He was panting, disbelieving that Tadao would be so reckless as to come and watch him in person despite the many obvious dangers in doing so. "How did you break free?" Shinso sounded odd, as no one had ever broken free without either his consent, being jostled, or hurt, yet Izuku had just suddenly fallen backwards. Izuku scrambled to his feet, still watching the crowd, and the voice called out again. "There you go, lad, back on your feet. Fight him." It wasn't Tadao, one look confirmed that. They only sounded alike. Izuku relaxed at that, finally allowing himself to turn and look Shinso in the eyes. Scared purple met inquisitive green. Hitoshi opened his mouth and took a reflexive step backwards, finding himself desperate not to lose Izuku's friendship. "Izuku, please, I'm sorry. I was just doing my best like you told me to. Please just dash." Izuku opened his mouth, forgetting the danger in doing so, ready to comfort his friend. A new voice called out, rough and guttural. "Don't talk back to him, kid. That's how he controlled you in the first place. That quirk in purely evil in design." There it was. A flinch. Shinso heard that shout, the whole stadium had. "Because of my quirk, people never feel like they can trust me? I said my quirk made it so others don't trust me, turn me into a villain." Shinso's words echoed in Izuku's mind as he watched his friend shrink from the verbal abuse thrown at him. It was at this that Izuku finally snapped. Shinso averted his gaze, looking away from the friend he felt he had just betrayed. "I'll step out. I don't want to fight you." He turned away, hearing rapid footsteps from Izuku's direction and naturally assuming the boy was coming to attack him. Starting to walk towards the edge, Shinso listened as the rapid step turned into a full-on run. A shout stopped Hitoshi before he could cross, however. It was Mike once again. "Midoriya. What has he done?" Shinso spun on his heel, the crowd staring with him in awe at Izuku. The green-haired teen had stormed off of the stage of his own choice, and was caught up in a rage that outshone his previous at the cavalry battle. He threw his hand up, pointing one damning "do get" into the crowd as he planted his feet. "Who said that?" Silence fell as Izuku screamed. "Who called my friend's Keurig evil?" Eyes turned to the man in question. The finger of damnation turned to him, pointing to his rapidly beating heart. "Who are you? Who are you to judge whether a power is good or evil? Who are you to throw away Shinso's potential so flippantly because he went at this battle with his all?" Hardened into a fist now, Izuku clasped his hand near his chest, circling to speak to those in the stands and those watching through the screens. "Quirks do not define good and evil. Shinso will be whatever he chooses, and none of you hold the power to decide where he belongs. He chooses for himself, and if I ever see anyone being treated like this ever again, then there will be hell to pay." His words echoed deafeningly, holding the crowd in a stunned silence. All were in shock of the harsh words spoken, respect subconsciously being added to Izuku Midoriya's name. The boy in question turned his own steely gaze onto Midnight. "Call it," he nearly ordered. "Izuku Midoriya is out of bounds. Hitoshi Shinso progresses to the next round." Mirth had abandoned her voice, leaving her cool and collected. At her words, Izuku turned back around, clambering onto the cement once more. Shinso hadn't been able to move, petrified from shock, and remained rooted to the spot as Izuku closed the distance between them. Why you could have made it farther than I will. Why would you, why dash?" His confusion cut as Izuku closed the last few steps and enveloped Hitoshi in a bear hug. He gripped the shocked teen tightly, not wanting to let go. "I told you. Shin, you're my best friend. Your quirk changes nothing aside that I might even respect you more. I couldn't stand by and let them treat you like that." He was whispering, Shinso the only one who could hear. Hitoshi Shinso couldn't keep himself together any longer. He openly started crying, fat tears rolling down his face at the sheer selflessness of his first best friend. No one had ever trusted him after he showed them his quirk, not even his own parents really, yet here Izuku Midoriya was, a living contradiction to everything Shinso knew, quirkless yet powerful, clever and strong enough to win 2 rounds against the best, determined to succeed, yet he threw his chances away for Hitoshi's honor. Shinso hugged Izuku back. He stained Midoriya's jacket with his tears, but the feeling of a true friend to hold overrode any personal space norms. Izuku sniffed himself, prone to tears as he was. "Stop crying, dude, I just gave up winning for you, don't make me cry on top of that." With that, the two clumsily made their way off of the platform, Izuku basically leading Shinso along as the boy tried to rein in his tears. Mike was ecstatic that his prediction was coming true, and even Midnight's face softened at the touching scene. And what a twist to start off on. I'll admit you guys, I was betting on Midoriya since he's so strong and clever. That brainwashing move threw me for a loop, but sacrificing your own chances of victory, of your own will, for someone else. This kid is a legend. Where's this form of chivalry in most people? But soon the games moved on, providing Izuku and Shinso a moment to talk things out in an empty hallway. How did you break free? To my knowledge, I didn't intend to let you go until you stepped out, and the connection is only ever broken if you're jostled or hurt in some way. Did you trip or something? Izuku thought, debating to tell the truth. There wasn't much point in hiding at least part of the truth, so Izuku half explained, half lied, I thought I heard my old friend Tadao in the crowd. Truth. I've been searching for him, trying to bring him back. Lie, and if he was in the crowd? I don't know, Toshi, really. Is it possible that a shock like that could break the connection? Shinso squinted at the ground, debating the issue. I have no idea. I've never exactly tested something like that. I've done relatively little testing all in all, so I probably don't know all of the reaches and limitations of my quirk. The two were silent for a moment, mentally thinking out the possibility. Regardless, Midoriya, Shinso locked Izuku in his stare, a new depth in the purple eyes. I just still can't understand why you did that for me. Well, Izuku chewed on his lip as he thought, pondering the situation. What had he been thinking? Up until now he had been dead centered on winning and defeating Bakugo. Then Shinso had taken control. As soon as Izuku had seen Hitoshi's flinch at what the crowd was yelling at him, all desire of grandeur vanished. I remembered what you had said about people making you seem a villain due to your quirk, and then you shrunk away from the crowd like how I used to always do from Bakugo. When I saw that, I lost control, I think. I meant every word I said, even though I might have gotten a bit too angry. No one should be allowed to discriminate anyone like that, especially you. Yeah, I gave up first place for you, but I would do it again, Shinso. Izuku's belief in the words he spoke reverberated throughout the hallway, even though his voice was barely above a whisper. Soft and strange, Shinso's smile seemed alien on his face. Before, his smiles always seemed forced, hinting at being cynical. Now his face had melted into a natural smile, and Izuku decided he quite liked the look on his friend's face. He wanted to make sure it stayed there. Though Izuku didn't recognize it at the time, whenever he was with Shinso, any and all thoughts of corrupting Hitoshi to the side of villainy simply flew out the window. He reveled in finding a friend who understood him so well. The mere thought of turning him into a villain was wholly repugnant. At last they returned to the stands, taking their places. Many stopped by and congratulated Izuku for being so selfless for his friends, and Shinso for having found a friend so true. They watched the games, Shinso and the others rather intrigued at their classmates' powers. Many of the battles played out as Izuku figured. Shiro was almost instantly defeated by Todoroki, to no one's real surprise. Mei used her jetpacks to avoid Kaminari's attacks, grumbling about how he could have destroyed her babies, then pushed him out of the ring. Then Ida's and Mia's fight came as a surprise. She stood there, calm and stunning as always, as Ida bent down ready to rush at her. As soon as the whip cracked, Mia held up her hands. I surrender, thank you. Ida, who had already started sprinting, came to a clumsy halt. I grew rather sick in the last game, but I still tried to recover enough to fight. I see that I cannot hope to stand against you, so I shall keep my honor and surrender now. She bowed slightly, both combatants turning to Midnight, who declared the fight to be over. Ida straightened. I see. Very noble of you. 1C seems to be full of many noteworthy characters such as yours. And if you are sick, would you want a hand to help you back to the stands? Smiling, Mia relaxed her shoulders. I would quite like that, thank you. You seem to be a gentleman. They stepped off, Ida lending Mia his hand, and the next battles commenced. Mina came out on top against Aoyama as was expected, the flashy teen coming to a disgraceful end. Ojiro defeated Momo as well, berating her shielded arm until she was pushed out of the ring. He then, being the kind-hearted soul he was, apologized profusely, but Yaoyorozu was clearly disappointed. In Tokoyami against Kirishima, the red-headed teen pulled a victory over his opponent, though it clearly was an effort for him. In the chivalrous spirit of the afternoon, he offered the half-bird boy his hand. Uraraka and Bakugo was just as painful as Izuku imagined. He of course spotted her plan right off the bat, cluing Shinso and Mia in. He was actually hopeful that her plan could work, though it hurt him to watch her get beat over and over by Katsuki. Izuku held his breath as she revealed her trap, hoping against hope it would work. It of course did not, and Uraraka was incapable of going on. Bakugo progressed to round 2. Shinso and Izuku took time to visit Uraraka, trying to comfort her and praising her for her technique. She smiled and nodded, but ushered them out as she could talk with her parents. As he left, Izuku cast one more look over his shoulder, wanting to stay and continue comforting the strong girl. His chest was tight and every instinct told him to help, but Shinso was pulling on his arm, and Izuku let himself be pulled away. His head hung in defeat in a way that he couldn't explain as he and Shinso walked to the waiting room to discuss a plan. Their planning was for naught. Shinso was easily wiped out of the competition by Shoto, who had guessed at the mechanics of brainwash, and kept his mouth shut. Walking off of the field, the crowd politely cheered for Hitoshi, reminding him that he did indeed brought his best. The rest I shall summarize as concisely as possible, so as not to bore you, dear reader. The second round consisted of Mei against Ida. She worked the gullible teen into a billboard for her technology, then simply waltzed off of the stage. Ida, not long after, was called away for family business that was kept undisclosed to the public. Ojiro won in a fight against Mina, and Kirishima was pummeled to defeat by Bakugo. The explosive teen was out of his mind and raged that Izuku would best him in the previous 2 rounds, only to stroll out of the competition like the Deku he was. It was during this fight, however, that a teacher came to Izuku, pulling him away privately. Standing in the hallway was none other than the principal himself. Just quick, I didn't get the email for the last chapter, so if you haven't either and you haven't read it, do so. Greetings there, young Midoriya. Principal Nizu greeted cheerfully. Come closer, you're in no trouble. Izuku didn't believe that. He was a villain in hiding, for goodness sake. Of course he didn't. Had they found evidence against him? He was sure that he never left any trail throughout his snooping. Regardless, he couldn't refuse the principal and slowly edged closer. Am I needed for something? Nizu smiled and waved a hand/paw. No. I'm simply here to offer you something. It is to my knowledge that you entered this with the statement that even if you won and was worthy enough, you would deny being transferred to the hero courses. Tell me, why is that? The hero courses are seen as the most respectable class of them all. Izuku sighed, crouching to the floor and sitting cross-legged in front of his principal. Well, you see, I lost any and all delusions of becoming a hero a whole year ago. I've been told all my life that because I was quirkless, he spat the word out as if it was poison, I would never make it as a hero. And you know what? They're right. Clearly I am not destined for such grandeur. On top of that, dear old Kakin, he spoke with the same level of spite, is also in the hero course. And you of course know our relationship. Nizu smiled and nodded. Is that all? One more reason, I suppose. Izuku added, voice turning mild as he spoke. Others, like Shinso, are more deserving of that spot. He both wants that and is fighting for it. It'd be cruel to place me there when I would hate it and never fought for it. If you were not fighting for the hero course, what was motivating you? This conversation was annoying Izuku. He felt like the principal was directing them in circles. To show Katsuki that he isn't what he think he is. I wanted to finally beat him at something, show that I've grown past him and I'm better than him now. So revenge. Yeah, sure. Petty revenge. Super unhero-like. More reason not to transfer me. His sentences were growing short and clipped as he struggled to get his irritation under control. What could the principal be getting at? So what motivated you to throw your revenge away for your friend's honor? Izuku groaned, throwing his head back. What does it matter? Why am I even here? Because I am trying to have you see things from my perspective. The principal smiled still, eyes twinkling with a special mirth. Young Midoriya, your act of selflessness impressed not only me but the whole crowd. You touched our hearts, especially us who knew that you acted with no intent of heroics. As you know, young Ida had to leave in order to attend to his family. That means there's an empty space. Izuku stilled from his fidgeting. Are you suggesting what I think you are? Indeed. In light of your actions, we are offering you the choice to re-enter the competition, taking Ida's place. Dumbfounded, Izuku's jaw dropped open. He had not been expecting that, of all things. If anything, he was expecting to have been found out. Re-enter the tournament? Retake his chance at defeating Bakugo? Izuku swallowed. I'm not sure what to do. This was simply too much to process. Take a moment, of course. Just don't take long, there won't be much in the way of a break before Todoroki's match. Was this somehow a trap? Or was he only overthinking this? He really didn't know what to do, his intricate brain working into overdrive. Oh, I'll tell you what you need to do. The familiar voice rang out from behind Izuku, causing him to whirl about in shock, nearly making him fall over. You need to take this offer and prove yourself like you originally were going to. Of course, it was Shinso standing at the end of the hall. He was nearly snorting fire from his determination, and at that moment he did not seem like the kind of guy to disagree with. He strode forward purposely, closing the distance between them. Sorry I was eavesdropping, but I'm actually not sorry. Midoriya, don't you dare refuse this. At the other's words, Izuku scrambled to his feet. Shin? What do you mean? Hitoshi was getting agitated now. What do you think I mean? He rubbed his face, exasperated. Midoriya. You could have easily beaten me and moved on to the next round and the round after that, if you hadn't sacrificed yourself like that. No, don't butt in. You deserve this. I don't think you realize, but you were muttering to yourself at the beginning of the games. I didn't hear all of it, but I got the general idea. You wanted to prove yourself, defeat Bakugo. Shinso clasped Izuku by the shoulders, a strange and earnest look in his eyes. Izuku, you have to take this. If anyone could make it to the top, it'd be you. It was as if a chord was struck in Izuku's chest. His fiery determination revived, blazing in his eyes. His mind emptied of its fog. Shoulders straightening and chest inflating, he looked ready to win once more. For a moment, Shinso and Izuku stood as equals. There was no dividing gap of abilities or strategic intelligence. Two best friends, one repaying his debt of encouragement to the other. Izuku nodded, turning back to his principal whom he had ignored. Well, you heard Shinso. I'll do it. Put me back in the games. Anger was something Izuku was still new to. He had learned to be angry at Katsuki, even at society. He'd become irritated as Tamura accidentally disintegrated his box of fries. Izuku had been furious when he had seen Tadao get taken down by Eraserhead. But anger just wasn't in his nature. He couldn't be angry all the time like Shigaraki, nor could he keep his anger as a hidden simmer like Eagle. He loved fun, smiles, sunny days out with friends. So this confusing mess of emotions he found himself in? It was a wholly alien sensation. If Izuku didn't know better, he would have almost said it was hatred. But he didn't hate Todoroki. He was angry at the livid boy, but he still felt that there was potential in him. A way to pull the teen down into the depths of his thinking. If he could only release those flames. Flames aside, Izuku was having a time of it just avoiding the miniature glaciers. Shoto seemed bent on corralling Izuku out of the ring, knowing Izuku would dodge or risk being captured. The green-haired boy's breath was coming in short gasps. The only plan Izuku could think of was, by some lucky miracle, outlasting Shoto's ice limit. But then there was his insane desire to make Todoroki break and use his flames. Izuku didn't know why Shoto kept his left side out of commission. In fact, most about his opponent was a mystery to him. That scar, his stingy use of his power, his constant anger and seeming frustration at the world. There was something he was missing and he wanted to know. But it was no matter. If Izuku somehow managed to survive these ice attacks, he'd get those flames from Shoto. Izuku's hands were getting scraped and cut from the sharp edges along the ice, having been forced time after time to hastily and recklessly climb the barriers to escape disqualification. He was also getting too reliant on force, using it to push himself up and move quicker. He wasn't worried about people recognizing that he had a quirk. During the small games, he'd made a big effort to show off his physical capabilities with the help of force, to convince the crowd he was simply well-trained. But he was also a dirty, rotten cheater. At last, Todoroki stopped for a moment, both boys catching their breaths. Izuku was bleeding and tired, Shoto exhausted and covered in frostbite from overuse of his quirk. They panted like dogs, bent over with their hands on their knees. Looking to each other, their eyes filled once again with anger. Why on earth? Izuku managed between gasps. Will you not use your fire? Scowling, Shoto replied with the same accusatory tone. You of all people don't know what it's like to be cursed with another's ambition. Brain whirling, Izuku puzzled his way through that statement in milliseconds. What it meant and how it might apply to him. Cursed with another's ambition? Bakugo had always run Izuku down into the ground of worthlessness to make himself feel and look better, determined to be the best on the outside regardless of the inside. It was common knowledge that Endeavor worked endlessly towards becoming stronger and finally outclassing All Might, but was too weak to do so. Enji was quite old-fashioned, so Izuku doubted he was above an arranged marriage. Todoroki, if he accepted that fire, would no doubt be overwhelmingly powerful. Perhaps as powerful as Izuku with his new quirks. Endeavor would have no doubt pushed Shoto to the limit, perhaps was even the cause of that scar. Shoto must have rebelled at some point, leaving them where they were now. Izuku set his jaw, unsure if he was annoyed or relieved that the only thing stopping those flames was a case of simple daddy issues. He took another step forward, Shoto raising his hand warningly. What does another's ambition have to do with our fight? Let him fight his own battles. I refuse to use his power. Shoto screamed, preparing a new wave of ice. He wasn't expecting what came out of Izuku's mouth, however, his opponent screaming right back before the ice could grow. It's your power. Your quirk, not his. In that moment, something snapped in Shoto's chest. His flames came to life as he stared dumbfoundedly at Midoriya, the other teen gazing back in awe at the sheer size of the inferno before him. The fire blazed, heat extending far enough to warm the spectators' cheeks. A slow smirk slid its way into Izuku's face. That was what he wanted. That crazed look in Shoto's eyes, the ice evaporating off of the other's body, the fact that he could feel the warmth from across the platform. Yes, that was what Izuku Midoriya wanted. He could finally fight back against Shoto now. As he prepared to rush his opponent, a new voice echoed across the stands, obnoxious and wholly unwelcome. It was Shoto's father, shouting down at his son for finally accepting his power. Izuku glanced to Shoto, seeing his evident displeasure. In an instant, the flames shut themselves off, and Izuku wanted to attack the stupid pro for ruining what he had just unleashed. His work simply thrown out the window. Fine. Shoto spoke, his gaze never leaving Izuku. It's my fire. I'll be sure when I progress to the final round to use it to the best of my ability. But I can't use it on you. You're quirkless, and that would put me at too great of an advantage. I've already hurt you, your hands. This round I'll win by my own merit. There was that stir of emotions again. Izuku was relieved that Shoto still accepted his power and promised to use it, but angered that Shoto would still not see him as an equal worthy of his full power simply because he was quirkless. Alright then. But I'm warning you, when I win against your half-hearted attempt, all merit will be mine. He dashed forward, ready to climb once more, determined to not lose ground. Shoto half smiled. So be it. He raised his right hand, ice shooting forth. Pushing himself harder, Izuku stayed his ground, effectively running on top of the moving ice like a treadmill. Soon he actually was slowly gaining ground. Shoto noticed, speeding the production of his ice, but it was too late. Using force in a rather reckless amount, Izuku jump-launched himself forward, tackling Shoto. Tumbling along, they exchanged blows and bloodied each other's faces with their fists. They had rolled near to the edge of the ring. First to stand, Izuku had taken firm hold on Shoto's left arm, knowing he would be safe from being burned. Shoto moved to retaliate, bringing his frost-steaming hand to Izuku's face, but the other was already in motion. With a mighty tug, Todoroki was sent flying over the edge of the line and lay there, dazed and shocked on the cement platform. His feet and legs were soundly out of bounds. Shoto Todoroki is out of bounds. Izuku Midoriya wins. The crowd cheered, yelling Izuku on. He in turn edged around to face Shoto, giving the other his hand. Sorry, but I have to win. Shoto sighed, taking the offered hand and letting himself be pulled to his feet. Don't give me empty apologies. I suppose it's my own fault for not taking you seriously and continuing to use half of this, my power. Izuku grinned, thrilled that his opponent was claiming his power as his own. Glad I could help with that, by the way. Shoto stared Izuku in the eye, locking him in place. I want to talk to you privately when I can. During Bakugo's fight with Ojiro would be preferable. Starting, Midoriya barely had time to mutter an agreement, before Shoto was walking away. As Endeavor occupied Shoto with a bombardment about using his quirk, Izuku was similarly bombarded by his friends cheering him on and encouraging him for his last fight with Bakugo. The idea of going into a one-on-one with his old tormentor terrified Izuku, but the fear was dulled by curiosity. Curiosity about Shoto and this strange talk they were to have. He left his friends when he was finally able to. A nature call's claim allowed him to wander the halls undisturbed as he searched for Shoto. Upon not finding the double-corked boy, however, Izuku gave up to find his waiting room, Kataki's explosions beginning out in the ring. Of course, Shoto was waiting in the waiting room, staring at his left hand neutrally. Of course you were waiting in here the whole time. Izuku sighed, slipping his UA jacket off and sliding into the chair across from Todoroki. I just spent 5 minutes wandering the halls trying to find you. Apologies. I figured here would be the first place you would go. Izuku shrugged. No matter. What did you want to talk to me about? I imagine it won't be long before Bakugo creams Ojiro. He was truly curious as to what Shoto could have possibly to talk to him about that couldn't wait until the games were over. The other was silent for a moment. Why did you work so hard to bring out my flames? You're incredibly intelligent, so you know how much of a disadvantage that would place you. And don't say that you would have won anyway, against my full power, I highly doubt that. Well, I'm not sure. This new situation was delicate. Izuku knew Endeavor pushed Shoto, and was most likely the reason he had been suppressing his fire for so long. Whatever answer he gave simply couldn't seem like he was trying to manipulate Shoto into giving what he, Izuku, wanted. Not if he hoped he could bring Shoto to his level of freedom. I guess I wanted to help you. There's no way suppressing half of who you are could be healthy, either mentally, emotionally, or physically. I don't know why you have suppressed it for so long. Technically true, he was only guessing, but I wanted to let you see that it was in fact yours. Something you should cherish as your own. Shoto scoffed. I doubt I'll ever cherish it. Did you happen to talk with my father before our fight? No. I've never met Endeavor personally. So you were going to fight me against my whole power, of your own accord? Yes? Even though you're quirkless? A cold bead of sweat ran down Izuku's spine. Yes. Even though I am quirkless. Shoto's eyebrows knit together. So then, explain to me why people seem to keep a good space around you when we all were crowded together in the race, or why, when you blew me and Katsuki away at the end of the relay, I felt a push to the side. Explain how your quirkless nature allowed you to jump so high, or maneuver your team so effortlessly. Explain how a lack of a quirk let you climb, run, and jump as you shouldn't have been able to do naturally, even with training against my ice. His two-colored gaze seemed to have penetrated right into Izuku's soul, as if searching for answers there. The explosions outside quieted, mixed voice calling the end of the match. Explain how your quirkless nature allows that, Midoriya? Izuku felt hollow. He'd imagined that he would have had to show to Shoto who he was, and had not expected the teen to have figured this out on his own. Midoriya, do you possess a secret quirk? And why bother to hide it? Swallowing, Izuku's mind went blank. His face adopted a perfectly neutral expression to match. Well, I'll admit, when you wanted to talk, this wasn't what I was expecting. Congrats, you've thrown me by surprise. I didn't think I would have been found out. Interesting wording, Shoto remarked dryly. Izuku smirked, his innocent childlike manner evaporating. I suppose it is, but accurate nonetheless. Sighing and tilting his head back, he thought deeply. Oh, how to explain this? Telling me what you're hiding would work. No, there isn't enough time before my match for that. Instead, he brought his head forward, setting his steely gaze on Shoto. I am offer you something. Todoroki's eyes narrowed. What? He stretched the word out, taking care in this situation. Izuku's smile morphed into a wide grin, one that was eerily familiar. You've impressed me, caught onto my secret. I've helped you accept who you really are as of this present moment. He pushed himself to his feet, breaking eye contact. It's a strange way of doing this, but I offer my friendship, and maybe some help regarding your troublesome father. There's no deadline, only come to me clearly when you're ready. And if you could abstain from telling others about my quirks, that'd greatly appreciated. He stepped away, strolling towards the door. You forgot your jacket. Shoto reminded, confused about the strange offer. If Izuku hadn't misspoken when he said quirks, then it made even less sense for the boy to hide them. And what reason could he have for being so secretive? The jacket, which had been laying forgotten before Shoto, dragged itself from the table, moved through the air of its own accord, and slid itself into Izuku's torso. Shoto froze. He's seen a power all too similar to that. Just remember, Shoto Todoroki. Izuku turned his head halfway, a wisp of smoke trailing from his mouth. Until you come with an answer, my offer stands. Now if you don't mind, I have a tournament to win. Shoto stayed frozen in his seat, shocked and shaking, until halfway through Izuku's and Bakugo's battle. When he had meant to corner Izuku about the hypothesized quirk, he'd expected many responses. A bluff to say Shoto was delusional, some wimpy response that it was dangerous and he was perhaps only recently learning to control it but didn't want to hurt anyone, begging not to tell others because of some psychologically mucked-up issue, anything really. Not that. Not what he had seen. Not that at all. As Shoto was struggling with his revelation, Izuku was stepping into the ring with his tormentor. His heart was beating as a rabbit's, the sound reverberating up into his mind. The strange, cannibalistic leer plastered onto Kataki's face washed out any and every plan Izuku had made. They were gone in a tsunami of terror. Bakugo was neither pleased nor displeased to see Izuku standing before him. He was only ready to rage. Izuku may have changed greatly in the past few months, but he was still the useless, terrified, timid mouse of a Deku, and Katsuki knew how to kill that mouse. Kill him. Yes, that was all he wanted. Perhaps finally remove that disgusting speck out of his world for the last time. Bye-bye, Deku. The two rushed each other. Izuku had been hoping that showing a sign of aggression, even if it was small, would throw Bakugo off. It didn't. Ducking and weaving, he did everything he could to survive Kataki's attacks. His mind, when not busy falling apart from fear, was scrambling to create some plan. But no plan came. All that came was fear and the innate, animalistic need to survive. It was clear that Bakugo was out for Izuku's blood. That crazed look in his eyes, the power stance, incessant explosions, even his chuckles and murmurs all pointed to how mentally and emotionally abusive Katsuki Bakugo truly was. Every fiber of his being was bent on taking Izuku down. Most likely in the worst possible way. "Why are you even trying, Deku?" Katsuki spoke in a low tone, almost sounding amused. "You know you don't stand a chance against me. I won't complain though, this giving me a chance to really let loose." He charged Izuku. First pulled back with an explosion ready to kill the other teen. Izuku ducked, rolled. The explosion singed the back of his jacket, Kataki's other hand brushing his back as he escaped. He tumbled onto his back and clambered up to his feet. On the edge of tears now, Izuku shuffled back in sheer terror. One thought, the best his brain could come up with as Katsuki turned and grinned an evil Cheshire grin, was not the best in terms of a plan. "I have to win if I want to survive today." Great. How was that supposed to help him? Bakugo was charging Izuku, most likely telling something along the lines of, "Die." But Izuku couldn't hear. He'd gone deaf. His limbs froze from fear, his mind desperately trying to find a way out of this. When to survive. When and survive. Milliseconds before Katsuki was upon him, Izuku's gaze flickered down to where he was standing. They were awfully close to the edge line. His blood went cold as Bakugo knocked him to the ground, one fist pulled back. "Oh, I'm a fool." Once, twice, 3 times. Bakugo's fist came down, impacting solidly with Izuku's face. The crack of his broken nose was covered by the sound of the 3 vigorous explosions. The crowd gave a unanimous "oh" of sympathy as the smoke cleared, peering in with morbid curiosity to see the most certainly defeated child. Cameras fixed themselves on Izuku's face, which was surprisingly intact and still connected to his body. Katsuki stood to his feet, an evil grin solidified in place. He threw his head back and howled his victory, little more than a feral animal over his slain prey. Time seemed to be crawling by at a snail's pace. No, even slower than that. That's when the yelling began. It started with Shinso, ever-loyal friend that he was, shouting and screaming for Izuku to get up. It was soon taken up by Mia next, then others in the crowd. Ochako 1A, some in 1B, members of the crowd, namely those who yelled at him and Shinso in earlier matches, and finally, second loudest of all, Todoroki. His flames had come to life once again, burning through his shirt as he and Shinso started screaming the loudest for Izuku to stand. Shoto was sure why he was yelling for Midoriya to rise. Knowing who the green-haired teen was now, it made no sense. Yet there he was, leaning over the railing, desperately needing Izuku, a hiding villain, to stand. Bakugo turned to his class, his howl devolving into a growl of irritation. He yelled right back at them, the noise so intense that Midnight, trying to regain control, was unheard in the stadium. No help came from Mike. He was yelling too, keeping the microphone away from a grabby Aizawa. Bakugo's voice cut short, as did everyone else's. Silence cut through the clamor. On hand, iron like in its grip, had wrapped itself around Kataki's ankle. He looked down in shock. "No, how are you even awake? I promised to defeat you." Izuku's voice was shaking, but audible in the death-like quiet. What are you, Dash?" His other hand clasped itself around Kataki's boot as well. "I'm fed up with you. I hate you." Bakugo raised his arm up, partly from anger, mostly from fear. Why he was fearing Deku of all people, he didn't know, but it didn't matter to him at that moment. All that mattered was Izuku shutting up. "You little Dash." He wasn't given a chance to finish. In one glorious, impossibly unexpected movement, Izuku had summoned the last vestiges of his strength. He lifted Kataki's foot from the ground, catching the other by surprise and nearly making him fall. "I promised I would beat you." With his last move, Izuku planted Bakugo's foot outside of the line. One heartbeat's time as Katsuki realized what had just happened enveloped the two. Izuku dragged a smile onto his face through his bloody nose, pointing the look up to his tormentor. Izuku didn't have to win to survive. "Beat you, Kaken." The words were barely more than a whisper, caught away from the sudden collective gasp. He had to survive to win. "Wadash. Katsuki Bakugo is out of bounds." Midnight shouted, raising her whip for the final time. "Izuku Midoriya wins the tournament." The crowd screaming could be heard kilometers away, disturbing the second and third year's game sessions. They screamed, hooped, yelled, and cheered, unified in revelry as the confetti cannons fired, filling the sky with glitter and paper. The students flooded the field, disregarding rules against such behavior to get to Izuku. They jumped and ran, screaming and cheering over the crowd. And at their head, running the fastest and screaming his friend's first name for the first time, was Shinso. He had tears of happy pride running down his face that had grown from tears of frustration. He was smiling naturally and it no longer looked alien on his face. For the first time he looked whole and happy with bags removed from under his eyes. Despite that he was the least physically fit, Hitoshi Shinso was outpacing the other students, reaching his best friend's side first. He knocked a shell-shocked Katsuki out of the way, pulling Izuku into his arms. Soon the limp and half-unconscious teen was piled onto the hands and shoulders of the throbbing wave of teenagers. Even those who didn't know Midoriya or really cared came simply out of the joy of not having the disgrace of Bakugo being champion. Izuku was limp in their hands but he smiled. He could hear Shinso's related yelling continually and repeatedly screaming, "Yes, yes, yes, what?" and cheering Izuku's name to the world. He could see Shoto's still active flame, Mia's whooping and impromptu dancing with another girl in their class. Uraraka's shining face was particularly pleasant to look at for him. It was beautiful to him, but all he wanted was seeing his mother's and Tadao's faces later that day. He'd won for them. Shinso too, and he took no small amount of pleasure seeing his best friend's elated face at his victory. One giant hand picked Shinso up by the back of the shirt and plopped him onto the jumping crowd. It was All Might himself, smiling down at the best friend duo, and Shinso pulled Izuku's rolling head into his own lap. "Don't you think your friend is looking a little beat up?" Shinso nodded, still grinning the widest he ever had before. He pointed off the field, taking charge. "To the nurse's office," he shouted, the crowd obeying his command. Uraraka floated herself up onto the crowd, and leaning down, kissed Izuku on the cheek out of pure happiness and reckless, adrenaline-fueled teenager abandon. He was so wiped of all energy, all Izuku could do was blush faintly, touching his face to his fingers. She immediately apologized, but Shinso yelled over her to kiss him properly and get it over with. Tactfully she did not, and the crowd disappeared into the hallways, off to find the nurse. Award ceremony. The crowd's cheering had barely ceased before the awards were presented. Shoto was standing coolly on the third-place platform, boring a hole into the cement with his steady neutral gaze. Rigid, barely moving, Katsuki could have made for a fantastic intimidating statue. Pure loathing and fiery rage radiated as the sun from the second-place platform. Izuku, tired and washed out from his performance, had actually slumped to the floor of the first-place platform. His weary, lopsided grin of satisfaction with himself was plastered onto his freckled face, eyes closed halfway. All Might entered the scene dramatically. He did everything like that, but today there was a crowd to scream him on and inflate his ego. Laughing with his boisterous nature, All Might waved the crowd on. He turned, his big plastic smile directed to the three-teen before him. Gaze lingering ever so momentarily on Midoriya, he stepped up to Todoroki. All Might gently asked the teen why he didn't use his flames, let the subject drop with a brief word of encouragement, and gave the stoic teen a terribly awkward hug. Bakugo was next and his temper was beginning to flare. He accepted none of All Might's encouragement or sympathy, and struggled under the even more awkward hug. All Might chuckled and laughed something about rebellious teens to the crowd, who eagerly joined in his mirth. Izuku being first was last. He had clambered to his aching feet, eyeing the gold disc in his hand. He liked its shine and sparkle. "So this is what winning feels like. Feels good. You've done splendidly indeed, young Midoriya." All Might hid his concern with a strong voice and a big smile. The child concerned him. Everything about him was raising warning signals in Toahinari's mind. His extreme strength, his intense method of fighting, how quickly he would go to any extreme just to win. Just for petty revenge against his old bully, Izuku had come this far. And that strange, no-alien look in his eyes was nothing short of frightening. Toshinori worried about what the child might have put himself through just to get where he was now. "I guess even a quirkless reject like me can surprise even a strong idol like you, huh?" Worry was clawing around inside Toshinori's chest now, causing his smile to lose a fraction of its shine. "You know," Izuku started, still speaking softly, "it feels so good, I don't even care this was given me by you." An icy feeling spiked through All Might's chest. The boy hated him then. How unfortunate. Regardless, however, he was a teacher over the child, and was duty-bound to fulfill his role as such. Laying a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder, All Might spiked gently, encouragingly. "You must learn to forgive what is past, my boy, and forget." He wrapped the boy in his arms, praying to some higher power that the child would listen. Get off of me. The whisper was barely audible, but barely audible was still, in fact, audible to Toshinori alone. The ice spike twisted and impaled Toshinori again, and as tactfully as he could, he retreated. He turned and the crowd cheered him on once more. Then, perfectly in character for the bumbling bimbo, All Might botched the ending phrase. He exchanged the classic, plus ultra, for a weak, good job, and the crowd hastily made him take notice of his blunder. Izuku sighed, rolling his eyes. He didn't care anymore. All he wanted was to revel in his mother's and Tadao's pride in him. Tired and weary, his mother's embrace and constant praise and pampering, coupled later with Tadao's raucous partying and genuine honesty, seemed all too heavenly for Izuku as he stood there on that stage. He turned his face up to the dipping sun, smiling confidently. Yes. At this moment, life was perfect for Izuku Midoriya.